Turn on.
Cause the weakest man see how he
Tune in.
The Satanist, the black magician, is not seeking that kind of
I think we're very control. When we keep the calculations, more or less.
Steve Outtrim, welcome back to the Gnostic Media Podcast.
Thanks for having me back, Jan. Looking forward to doing this one.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to this as well. This is part 6. I suppose this is the conclusion. Is that correct?
Well, I think we'll need to do one more to do the conclusion. We've been taking a trivium-based approach to this, and we're really going through the grammar first. We've gone through the when, which is that Burning Man was launched at the same time as the Internet, the Cacophony Society, and MAPS, the Psychedelic Association, so mid-80s through to today, and it's really grown up with the World Wide Web. We've also gone through the where, which this began at Baker Beach, a nude beach next to the Presidio military base in San Francisco, and it moved to Nevada to the Lovelock Gunnery Range next to the Fallon Air Force Base out of Nevada, the Black Rock Desert. So the next thing to start going through really is the who, and in our last episode 5B, we looked at the technical team of Burning Man, people from the Pentagon and White House that run all the networks there. Now we're actually going to be looking at some of the key people in the Burning Man story, including the official 6 founders and some of the unofficial founders. So, after we've been through where, when, who, and we've given a pretty good overview of what's going on out there, I think that's a good time for us to then tie all of these threads together, and I can actually present a thesis. And that's, because we all have a common set of information to share now, an understanding of Burning Man that's a little bit deeper than the surface level.
Absolutely it is. It's not just a free love rave party out in the desert that's organic. It's actually a massive military operation and the apex of the MKUltra program.
And as with everything that we do, please do your own research. There's a PowerPoint presentation with notes that accompanies this. All of the citations are in the notes. You can read for yourself. We try to use primary source information and what people have said in their own words as much as possible.
Absolutely. All right, shall we begin?
Yep, let's get into it.
All right, I'm excited for this. There we go.
Okay, that's full screen?
Yep.
All right. So we'll begin with part 6, the who's who. And we're not going to be looking at all of the people involved with Burning Man. There really has been a very large number of people. There's some people that played significant roles that I'm not going to talk about today. There's a bit of a common thread in the people that was going to zero in on. And I've got a quote here from Aleister Crowley. Establish at thy Kaaba a clerk house. All must be done well and with business way. And the Kaaba is obviously the black rock, the magical stone at the heart of the magic.
Absolutely.
And he's saying that every wizard should have their own temple, their own special magical black rock that they worship around, and that they should set that up as a business. So sell memberships, subscriptions, newsletters, magazines, books, whatever it is related to the magic, so that it's a well-run operation with organized accounting and record keeping and things like that. Basically, turn your wizardry into a legitimate-looking business. And thought that's an interesting idea from Crowley, because you can kind of see that being echoed in what Burning Man, the organization, has become around this original occult idea of burning in effigy.
Absolutely.
So this slide here is from Outside magazine, from their online version, and it's a really excellent story by Brad Wieners on an oral history of Burning Man, where he's going to talk to many of the original people. And as we've explored in the earlier parts, they all have different stories to tell. There's many different versions of events of this. But this one says, Burning Man is partly the story of a half dozen eccentrics, an unemployed landscaper, an art model, a struggling photographer, a .com PR gal, an aerobics instructor, and a sign maker who made good. Less charitably, it's the tale of a group of slackers who grabbed hold of the one thing that brought them notice and eventually a paycheck, and have ruthlessly ridden it for all it's worth. The truth contains elements of both, of course, but one thing's for sure, it's never boring. So, there's kind of an indication right there that you're still not going to be getting the truth from whatever the ensuing piece is. And, this is really where the trivium comes in, that we listen to what these people say, we think critically for ourselves, we do the research, and then, we look for contradictions, for errors, we look for an abnormal number of coincidences, and we try to put this stuff into context. And so what we're looking at here is the official story of Burning Man. And for most of the people who go to Burning Man, this is the story they've heard and believe. And so when they hear, Steve Outtrim says Burning Man is Satanist, or Steve Outtrim says Burning Man is all connected to the military, they're like, well, that guy's got to be crazy, because look right here, it says it's an aerobics instructor that did it. So, why would the actual story not be told? That's a suggestion that there's something there that maybe is relevant to the story, but is so significant that they don't want the public to understand. I don't know, but that's what we're going to get into. So we begin with this guy, Larry Harvey. He's the official and undisputed founder of Burning Man. Although, as we've shown before, there were earlier events going on and the beaches of San Francisco, next to the water, burning figures in effigy, which he seems to have taken over. He considers himself to be a social engineer. He's very proud of that, by the sound of it, and he is Burning Man's chief philosophy officer. So they've bought some land for $7.5 million out in Nevada. They're going to have a year-round philosophy center at Fly Ranch. It's got a Burning Man's version of Esalen, and he's the chief philosophy officer. So part of that is in 2004, when Burning Man had been going for nearly 20 years, he went and wrote the 10 Principles of Burning Man, and they've kind of become the philosophy of this cult, which last week in San Francisco, they had a function saying, hey, we're a cult and we're proud of it. Unfortunately, I couldn't make that, but that would have been an interesting day. Larry Harvey is the only person known for sure to have been at every single Burning Man, and there's disputes about who was at the first Burning Mans. The guy is an autodidact, which means he taught himself by reading. He's very into Freud. At the time that Burning Man was started, he had a real obsession and fascination with Harry Houdini. And he's also very into everything bohemian. He was once asked what would an ideal day in San Francisco look like for a tourist, and he said he would begin with a bag lunch on the steps of the Bohemian Club in Nob Hill, and then walk down to a dive bar in the Tenderloin. So obviously thinks about the Bohemian Club. My information is he's been to Bohemian Grove and has friends who are members. He's also involved with the California Institute for Integral Studies, and this is another Esalen-like, New Age kind of think tank. Everybody get together and share your personal story type of thing. And they actually offer a course in Burning Man. You can go and study Burning Man towards some form of a qualification. So Larry is ex-army, and that's something that a lot of people probably don't know about him. He was stationed in Germany during the Vietnam War, and he actually he had learned almost a trick, because at the time of the Vietnam War, it was the last time that the United States had the draft. So young men of military age were brought into the army and sent off to war, and a large number of the casualties in Vietnam were actually from these draftees. And so Larry had received information that if he went and volunteered for the army, rather than being drafted, then that would give slightly more flexibility in the assignment that he got. So I've got an excerpt there from his military record from FOIA requests, and it says he was in the Army of the United States for 5 days, from October 25th, 67 to October 30th, 67. And then he was in the United States Regular Army from the 31st to the 9th. Now, you'd think that that's just the same thing, but it's actually the Army of the United States was the entity created for the draft. So he's gone into the recruiting office, they've signed him up with the paperwork initially, but then he's gone to regular U.S. Army, and the training that he received was as a clerk typist. So he's in the typing pool in the army in Germany while others are being sent off to war. Now, possibly that simply happened because he found a loophole and a trick, but his father was a Freemason, and his brother Stuart was in the Mole, which is the elite youth league of Freemasonry. Bill Clinton went through this. So it may well be that through secret society connections, there were some strings that were able to be pulled, got this guy to Germany. But anyway, he wasn't in the army for very long, like basically just under a year. And, it's kind of like Bear Owsley, like some of the other people that come up in the story, they just like drop it, or Jerry Garcia, another one, drops in the army, gets a secret security clearance, and then he leaves because he won't get dressed in the morning or whatever. Like it's pretty nice that you get to escape from military service and then end up going on to become a counterculture guru. That certainly doesn't happen to everyone that goes through the military. Usually they have to do a minimum tour. He went to college in Oregon. Back in those days, he used to have a beard. He didn't have the cowboy hat. When his father passed away, he inherited his possessions, and his dad's Stetson hat he started wearing as a mark of honor and respect for his father. He and his brother were both adopted, and his dad was actually born in 1899. He was a rancher. So he sort of like grew up in his own little world a bit on this ranch, in this world of books, and became very, very, very intelligent. It became part of this group of sort of latte carpenters that they called themselves. When his mom, I believe it says his grandmother on the slide here, which is from Brian Doherty's book, but I interviewed Larry's ex-girlfriend who said it was his mom, which makes a bit more sense. But after the dad passed away, she was together with another fellow, and then he had some money, so he got a small inheritance, bought a van, and starts doing this landscaping business. And they're sitting around cafes discussing plays and things like that, trimming trees in their small time. And this is how they come up with the idea for Burning Man. In 2014, he was invited to speak at a conference in London. And that's sort of what the chief philosophy officer does, flies around the world promoting the values of Burning Man. And in the one-page summary of his speech, there's a link to this slide from the Independent newspaper in the UK. He talks about child abuse, that in an uncontrollable rage, he threw his child 3 feet into a closet. And he talks about summoning the spirit of his dead father for conversations, which is a magical practice known as necromancy. So this is what I guess is part of promoting the values of Burning Man, is to go around the world talking about stuff like this. Seems a bit strange. The other thing that seems strange is from their annual report, they say in 2014, he's in a leadership discussion with the Navy and hosted by the Chief of Naval Operations. What does the Navy want to do with the rave? Why bring the leader of a rave to teach the Navy? It seems extremely, extremely bizarre, unless there are deeper connections between Burning Man and the Navy and the military than are there on the surface. And just a quick note on that as well. Since our last episode, 5B, we talked about a guy called Justin Drew, who had been brought in to run Burning Man for the federal government, and he'd come out of running the Executive Operations Center for Intelligence for Southcom, all the South American and Central American organized crime traffic. That guy has since resigned, so I'm not sure if that's a result of too much public exposure on his LinkedIn profile, or something more likely probably to do with what's going on with Trump and Mike Flynn and things like that. But anyway, the other thing to wrap up on Larry Harvey now is that in 2013, he was a guest speaker at a conference put on by The Economist. The Economist is owned by the Rothschilds, Lynn Forrester de Rothschild, a big Hillary Clinton supporter, pictured with James Alefantis and David Brock at some of the Comet Pizza, Tony Podesta art-related soirees. She's the editor of The Economist. And so The Economist felt that to teach the leaders of the world about economics, they needed to get DJ Spooky and Larry Harvey to come in. And they spoke about what are the social and economic movements that will radically change societies in the coming year. And you just note that word there, radical. And in Burning Man's 10 principles, they have the word radical 3 times. And here it is again, radically change societies. So, what happened to radically change societies around 2013? Well, that was the Arab Spring. Hong Kong protests, kind of triggered by people from Google taking a sabbatical and using technology proven at Burning Man. But anyway, this is the circle. This guy's gone from being a bicycle messenger and selling hot dogs outside a punk nightclub to now advising the chief of naval operations and the Rothschilds on how to create social transformation. And what is their basis for measuring that? Like, they got 70,000 people a year to do LSD. I don't know. This is where the logic falls apart. There's also a picture. There's a couple of pictures of Larry in his younger years. One, he's wearing a pith helmet with someone who looks like the Gimp, although this is probably before Pulp Fiction, so I don't know quite what's going on there. And then another one, he's holding this magical wand that belonged to a 1957 Mardi Gras drag queen, apparently some sort of prized possession. And what I'm doing in laying out the people that we're highlighting here is I'm trying to get a roughly chronological order of when they first got involved with Burning Man. So the next guy involved is this guy, Jerry James, and he's from an Air Force background. He grew up on Air Force bases. His dad was an officer. I haven't been able to find out much more about his father's involvement in the Air Force. But this guy's a builder, sort of carpenter with training, and he and Larry Harvey, their kids used to play together, and they'd make toy guns out of wood and go to the beach and run around. And so basically in the official version of events, Larry Harvey calls up this guy one day and says, "Hey, do you want to make a man and burn it?" The guy says, "Excuse me?" He says, "Yeah, you want to make a man out of wood and take it to the beach and burn it?" He says, "Yeah, okay, sure, let's do it." And then Burning Man is born. After a while, they wanted to build a bigger and bigger man. They needed more people to create a larger structure, and that's when they thought of reaching out to this guy, John Law. We'll talk about him in a second, and the San Francisco Cacophony Society, who had some bodies that may be able to help with a quirky art project. This guy seems like a pretty good guy, Jerry James, but he sort of disappears from the Burning Man history. He's shown up at a few events since, but no details are really known of their falling out. What was the circumstances for him to no longer be involved? And then the other person who's supposedly there, even earlier than the beginning, was this artist named Mary Grauberger. So she met Janet Law, Larry's girlfriend, down at Fort Mason. Fort Mason keeps coming up quite a bit in this story, and Janet was teaching a ceramics class there. Mary was a student, and they would go down to Baker Beach to fire pottery in the beach. Mary became a director of the Unity Foundation, and in the official story of Burning Man, she was on the board of the Unity Foundation with some heavy cats. And I contacted the author, Brian Doty, of that book and asked him what he mean by that, and he doesn't really remember. But he thinks he sort of means like, some heavy dudes, some shakers and movers in San Francisco. And certainly they were in this Unity Foundation. The Unity Fairs were after the hippies of the Summer of Love, 50 Years of Flower Power stuff. They had these big festivals with the Grateful Dead, Jefferson Starship, same thing continuing to repeat. And then they had the origins of, the public LGBT movement as a social and political protest force in the Lesbian and Gay Freedom Day in San Francisco, one of the biggest events in the history of the city, 300,000 people. And in the city of San Francisco, at that time, it's probably about 700,000 people. So that's a lot of people coming to town. And they were going to do a 20th anniversary of the Human Being in 1987. The Unity Foundation was also involved in this year's 50th anniversary celebration. So this lady, Mary Grauberger, is presented as an artist and a bit of a funny old kind of pottery lady that did these art projects on the beach that Larry kind of picked up the idea from. But, she's on the board of this major promotional event that's bringing hundreds of thousands of people to festivals. And so that's I think we can ring the coincidence meter for me. Like, that's something, why is that downplayed so much in the official history? And the other thing, which is a contradiction, is that via Janet Law, Mary has conveyed to me that she now disputes the official version of events recorded in This Is Burning Man. So she never burned anything on a solstice at a beach, and she would do events at the beach. He would make sculptures out of driftwood, take photographs of them, and let the ocean come and wash them away. Some of Larry's earlier versions of events, he said that there was a sofa with polyester mannequins on the beach and people burned that in a bonfire, and that's what they were trying to recreate. But Janet Law, who was, when she split up with Larry, became roommates with Mary, and that's around 1981. So supposedly Mary was doing these things right up until the solstice of 1985, and then Larry Harvey did it in the 86 solstice because Mary didn't want to continue it. Well, Janet, being her roommate, said that absolutely did not happen. There were no burns like that. And via proxy through her, Mary confirmed that as well. So, I've got a picture down the bottom there from Bruce Forrester from Sausalito, the Snake Theatre, Beelzebub burn, 1979. And that's the earliest one of these effigy burns in the Bay Area I've been able to trace, followed then by Ocean Beach burns by Timothy O'Neill that we covered in part 4. And then the next guy comes as this unofficial founder of Burning Man, a guy called Flash Hopkins. And in piecing together the origin myths and stories of Burning Man, he says he was at the first Burning Man and they ran into a witch's coven and they gave them these strawberry slippery nipple treats that they ate on the beach. So, I actually believe that. I believe he went to the 85 one on Ocean Beach where it was, a bunch of Freemasons and other occultists doing a Wicker Man effigy burn, and he probably did run into a witch coven. And he provided the timber to build the first Burning Man, and it was built, I've said garage there, I believe it was actually his mom's basement. But so in piecing together what really happened, Larry calls up his friend Jerry, says, hey, do you want to build a man? The guy says, yeah, let's do it. They go decide to build the man. Well, where did they get the timber? Where did they get the space to build it? It turns out this guy Flash had a bunch of timber and a bunch of space. So did they just have the desire, and then by asking all their friends, does anyone have enough spare timber that we could build an effigy from it? Yeah. Or was it the other way around? This guy Flash is like, hey, I've got a bunch of timber. I need to build this satanic effigy to burn on the beach, but I can't do it by myself. You guys build these wooden guns for your toys for your kid. Your buddy's a carpenter. Do you think you could come and help me with this project? And I'm speculating, but in terms of, looking at the holes in the official story and applying logic to it, it seems to me more logical that the person with the timber and the space got the carpenters rather than the carpenter's miraculous.
The old cart before the horse.
Yeah. So this guy Flash, he's on TV. He's the host of the Doing Da Vinci show on Discovery Channel, and the Burning Man theme last year was Da Vinci's workshop. And they're trying to transition their positioning in the tech world. Now it's specifically towards the emerging maker movement. So I don't know how much of that is tied to him, but you'll see I've got a picture of him at the bottom left there, which is from his website, flashhopkins.com. Pretty cool website. He's a very interesting character, but he appears to be doing some kind of Masonic or occult hand signal gesture, which if you look on the right of my slide, I have found a similar gesture like that. It's not from the Masons. It's actually from some of the more satanic branches and areas within Catholicism. So looks like he's doing a satanic symbol on his website. This is the guy that in the Helco series, he was Papa Satan. So he likes to dress up as Satan, but that wasn't just like a one-off thing for an art installation. This is like at Burning Man, we see a picture there of Flash's Hell's Kitchen. We also have McSatan's with the Mad Cow Burger. It's just like Satan, 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 hell, hell, hell with this guy. And he was described by SF Gate, which is the San Francisco Chronicle, a Hearst newspaper. It's their online portal. Described him as Burning Man's Mafia Don. So, here's this thing going on in the desert. There's pretty much tons of illegal activity going on, as we exposed. DEA informer Gordon Todd Skinner was there with like 400 grams of MDMA handing out for free to people as a DEA, I don't know, agents, employee, whatever you want to call that. So the government knows that people are doing illegal activity at Burning Man. It still continues. And this guy is described by the Hearst newspapers as the Mafia Don. So, you tell me what that means. But he's a direct descendant of Stephen Tucker Hopkins, who was one of the signers of the Declaration of Independence and happened to be Benedict Arnold's cousin. And then this guy's great-grandfather's opened the first pub in the US. So he comes from Rhode Island. He went to Harvard. I'm not sure if he graduated. It wouldn't surprise me to learn that he comes from money because he never seems to have particularly had a steady job. He's been involved in a bunch of different art projects and, TV, media, Hollywood style thing. But he apparently first met Larry Harvey on a mother-daughter double date. I think it was the daughter and granddaughter of Whittaker Chambers. And Whittaker Chambers was involved in a big spy scandal. I think he turned out to be a Russian spy. But there's some discussion that he may have actually been a double agent working with US military intelligence to set up others. And I've got a link to that in the notes. So we can ring the coincidence meter for that one too, that where the two founders of Burning Man met each other on this double date, there's a tie to the intelligence community. And if that was the only one, who cares? But, when you start continually finding links and connections to the intelligence community, it goes a bit beyond the coincidence threshold. Also, this guy, he took a bullet for Burning Man in Gerlach, the local town in Nevada. He got shot by an old lady in a bar fight. Everyone was probably a bit liquored up, I would think, in a situation like that. And the concept of flash mobs is actually named after this guy. It was the phrase is coined by Howard Rheingold in his book Smart Mobs, and Howard Rheingold is part of the Stewart Brand Group and the Whole Earth catalog promoting Burning Man going out to the desert. So the concept of a flash mob is actually based on this guy's sort of spontaneous art installations he was doing at Burning Man, where people would suddenly show up at a location and it would be 20 people in swimming outfits doing a synchronized swimming routine. They would just come, perform the outfit and the piece, and then disappear. And so this flash mob concept in Australia was used to trigger race riots in Cronulla Beach. And it's been used in the Arab Spring to get protesters to come to the Tahrir Square, and it was also used in the Occupy movement. So this is an example of a technology being prototyped and trialed at Burning Man that then gets deployed in these larger operations in the outside world. Now this guy Dan Miller was Larry Harvey's roommate from 1982 to 2000. They call him the man's man. And when Jerry James disappeared, Dan basically stepped up as the builder of the man. Now, I'm just really sticking to professional information about the people that we're covering here and what's in their resumes and on their own websites and so on. So, it says on the Burning Man website that this guy literally lived inside the closet in Larry's apartment. And then Dan had to correct that statement in 2014 with a comment. He said, in my tenure as roommates with Larry, I had an actual bedroom. We had a large walk-in closet that served as a guest bedroom that had a steady stream of guests. So these two bachelors have lived for almost 20 years in a small apartment while Larry has raised his kid from his previous marriage. And so it's just an interesting kind of social psychological thing when you think of the vast expanse of Burning Man in the desert and going out there to build this massive structure, and these two guys and a young baby being together in a small apartment where the guest bedroom's a closet. There could be some sort of psychological link going on there. And I've got a link as well to an early story about Burning Man from Monk magazine, where they discussed it in a single sentence that takes up a whole page. This neo-pagan, ritualistic, archetypal type of thing. So Dan Miller he seemed to be hanging out with the Cacophony Society and John Law and that kind of art crowd as well. There's a photo of him from John Law's website there doing looks like a climb of the Golden Gate Bridge. So he seems to be one of the links between Larry Harvey and that Cacophony group. Also, just to mention on Dan Miller that one of my sources worked with his brother in a military contractor and was invited to attend Burning Man with him in 1985, which is a contradiction with the official story of 1986. Anyway, I just mentioned that in passing. So then coming on to these two guys, and John Loras is quite a famous founder of Burning Man, and he's probably the hero of the piece, if anyone in the history of Burning Man can be seen as truly one of the good guys. But he hasn't been involved since 1996, other than as a commentator on it. I think probably between he and I, we're probably the two most disliked people in the Burning Man community because we have spoken out against some of the things that they've done. His dad was a decorated military veteran, but he became a teenage runaway, and he was had a juvenile warrant out against him from Tennessee. He was basically homeless, sleeping on a bench in Golden Gate Park, and then he runs into this suicide club group, which is Gary Warren from The Farm, these guys coming out of the communiversity, linked to the Diggers and all the free stuff movement from Haight-Ashbury in the 60s. And these guys had their own urban farm kind of, commune in the middle of downtown San Francisco, which happened to have a punk club in it. And Larry happened to later on be the hot dog vendor outside that punk club. Another huge figure in Burning Man, Chicken John, he was also one of the promoters of this punk club around the farm. But this guy, John Loras, is a founder of the Cacophony Society as well. And he's a direct link between San Francisco's Cacophony Society and this earlier suicide club. And the suicide club, they were a secret society. They prepared to risk their lives. And they were doing things like infiltrating neo-Nazi groups and the Moonies cult. And if you look into the history of both of those things, modern Nazis in America and the Reverend Moon, you'll find some amazingly deep links into the Bush family. And, the Bush family, Bush Sr., of course, being tied to the Iran-Contra affair with Oliver North. And very, very closely linked to the Moonies. So it's an unbelievable coincidence that this suicide club, which first of all is named after Jack Parsons, occultist and disciple of Aleister Crowley, he had his own little group was called the Suicide Squad, also sometimes called the Suicide Club. And so they've sort of modeled that on him. There's one coincidence. And then secondly, the type of activities they're doing seem to be tied up with projects that, the director of Central Intelligence had been connected to as well. That's one hell of a coincidence. So this guy, John Law, he first goes to Burning Man in 1989, and he ends up becoming one of the first owners of it with Larry Harvey and with Michael. Then they have a bit of falling out after the Halco debacle where somebody got killed. And when he left, he said that he knows Larry, he's worked with him, and the man is evil. That's an assessment of a guy who dedicates his event to Satan, that he's evil. Not really surprising. They had a bit of a lawsuit over the ownership of the Burning Man, in which this guy wasn't really looking for money. He was trying to take the Burning Man trademark and put it in the public domain so it could be used by the burners. And this is the thing about Burning Man. It's not an event like Coachella where promoters have taken a personal financial risk to create a business and put up the money to book all of these acts and everything. This is a crowdsourced event where Larry Harvey and the organisers have really done very little. They provide a statue and they set fire to it, said everybody come, bring your own stuff, provide the entertainment, provide the food and the music and the booze and the girls, and everybody pay to come and attend this. And so from the point of view of the burners, the idea that it can be owned by a corporation or controlled by a small group of people when it was made by all of us is really a huge philosophical problem. And this came to a head in this 2007 lawsuit, the John Law lawsuit, which was eventually settled out of court for an unknown sum. But John Loras said that out in the desert, the first year through to about around the fourth year, it was all suicide club people out there. And if you want to say what happened between 93, 94 and the Burning Man of today, well, that's when the electronic music began and the ravers started coming in. And that's when the much bigger crowd started to come at Burning Man. And this Cacophony Society, it's still going. They still have events and chapters around the world. It hasn't taken off. They can't have an event where 1,000 people go. And likewise, even for Burning Man itself, it's got these different regional events around the world, but they haven't taken off to the same extent either, even though they copy many of the other elements of the Burning Man formula. The next person I want to talk to on this list is kind of been erased from the official story of Burning Man, but he was an integral part of the organisation and the event in the early days. This guy, Chris Radcliffe, who he's from the Navy as well. And he went to the Navy Aviation School, Millington, Tennessee. So there's a link between him and John Law in this background. And actually what we'll find is that almost none of these people that we're talking about today have come from San Francisco, and most of them have come from the East Coast. But this guy's gone to a Catholic military school, then he's gone to UCLA film school in full-time drag. He's working as a transsexual prostitute in Hollywood to support his cocaine habit. And he's gone from that to becoming a founder of Burning Man. He first got involved in 1991, where they took Burning Man down to Fort Mason and set it up on a barge. And I'll get to that again in a second. But it was going to float away on the barge because nobody thought to hold on to the ropes, and he managed to save it just in time, became a part of the crew. When Hurricane Katrina went down, he was in New Orleans with an AK-47 in a dress, guarding his house in drag with a machine gun from looters. He is married to a woman. They're artists in Portland. And as well as being a co-owner of the original neon sign company with John Law and Michael, that kind of led to the foundation of Burning Man. He was very good friends with Paul Addis, who was part of a group called Black Rock Intelligence. And these were people, I guess, who bought into the original sales pitch that Burning Man was for merry pranksters and anarchists that wanted to reject conventional society and do amusing pranks. So this guy, Paul Addis, first of all, he hung a large pair of balls on the Burning Man statue, which I think is pretty funny. It was a time when they needed to do that. And then he actually burned the Burning Man down early in 2007. He set fire to it on a Tuesday night, the night of a lunar eclipse. And he was charged with arson. And there's a bit of controversy in the Burning Man community because they tried to stitch this guy up with a lot, extra costs and the cost of his damage to make sure that he was charged with a felony. So he did some prison time for that. It was the end of his legal career. He went and did a Hunter S. Thompson style stage show. He never ratted out the other members of Black Rock Intelligence that were his accomplices in these acts that he claims existed. And then he jumped in front of a train and killed himself. So a bit of a tragic story, and sadly by no means the only person connected to this Burning Man scene who's ended their time with it in a suicide. Here's a thing from the Communiversity. The original first thing about it that ever appeared in print about the Suicide Club in 1977, the Charter Meter, it says that members must agree to set their worldly affairs in order to enter into the real world of chaos, cacophony, and dark saturnalia. So I don't know if you got any ideas about different meanings of that, Jan, but dark saturnalia seems like devil worship to me.
Sounds like devil worship to me as well. And well, going back to Black Rock and Kaaba, isn't that all connected to Saturnalia worship?
Right. Well, the Black Rock and the Black Stone being a symbol of Saturn, definitely. Then the Black Sun. So, and then we also you've got here they're going to be going to deserted cemeteries, storms, caving, haunted houses, Nazi bars, fanatical movements, hot air balloons, stunts, exposés, and impersonation. Now, this is before they've ever had a meeting. They're going to be going to do all of this stuff. So it sounds very much to me that whoever's putting this organization together had specific plans in mind for it. And, I think maybe what can't come back. I can do an appendix to this series later in the year or something where we talk about these earlier groups, Cacophony Society, Suicide Club, the Situationists, the Diggers, many of these movements that were going on before Burning Man had sort of fed into it.
So you've actually found a connection between the Diggers and Cacophony Society. I have the Diggers coming out of the New Left, which, of course, was run by Aldous Huxley and Ginsberg, and they all worship guys like Leon Trotsky, who murdered like 20 million people in Russia. But you found a connection bridging that?
Yeah, well, the bridging connection is that many of the Diggers were involved in the foundation of the Communiversity. The Communiversity was basically a free university where you can come in and teach a course. Anyone can teach a course and anyone can attend the courses. And so they themselves drew that history from what the Diggers were doing in Haight-Ashbury in the 60s, where they were giving out free food and they were teaching some free classes and everything. So And then the communiversity, the people behind it, Nancy Prussia, Gary Warren, Adrian Burke, Dave Warren, RJ, and some other names. These were the founders of the Suicide Club.
Right.
So,
Actually, I do have that connection in the brain database going directly to the Suicide Club, and then that becomes what, the Cacophony Society, and then they found Burning Man.
Yep, that's right. And then this guy here, David Warren, he's the first lighter of the Man. He's an ex-Marine, and he's also an ex-circus carny, just like Anton LaVey was. So moving on, I'm going to try to go really quick because we've got so many people to go through. But we're going to have to go into a bit of detail on this guy, because if anybody in the whole pantheon of Burning Man stands out as being a lifetime actor, I think this one is a real candidate for it. His name is Michael, which is actually his real name, believe it or not. He sometimes goes by M2, and he's most widely known in the community as Danger Ranger. He's considered one of the founders of Burning Man, and he first went in 1989. So today there are 6 official founders of Burning Man, and they were involved in the LLC, Black Rock City LLC, that was put together in 1997 after Helco, that was recently transferred to a non-profit organisation. And of the 6 official founders, only 2 of them, Larry Harvey and Michael, actually went to Burning Man at Baker Beach. The others arrived much more recently in the piece, with Marion Goodell as recently as 1995. This guy was also early on in the Cacophony Society. He basically joined the Cacophony Society, immediately became the editor of their newsletter, and then immediately went to Burning Man. And he was also part of Survival Research Labs with Mark Pauline, which is an art group doing large robotic art pieces with a lot of ties to the tech industry in the Bay Area. I found a link to them from the Order of the Trapezoid, a cult website on archive.org from back in the late 90s, early 2000s, where the Order of the Trapezoid was promoting the Survival Research Labs. We'll come to this Cacophony newsletter in a second, but his father was a World War II veteran. He was a sergeant in the Army Air Corps. And then this guy, Michael's from the Navy. And I think the reason that these connections, whether it's their direct military service or their parents having military service, so that they grew up in a military family, I think that has some significance, which will be obvious to most of your audience, Jan, from Dave McGowan's work looking at Laurel Canyon and all of the military and intelligence community backgrounds of the most of the American rock musicians of the 60s. And then as well, your own work with Joe looking at the Grateful Dead and the military and intelligence and Freemasonry, secret society connections between the Grateful Dead that we just keep finding in the actual history, the true history of the counterculture, again and again, that these people either are from military families or were in the military themselves. And so here's another one. Like I've got a list here from the official Burning Man website, the profile of this guy, Danger Ranger, and you'll see that it says nothing in there at all about him being in the Navy. Although earlier profiles often do talk about him being a combat veteran in Vietnam. But, in fact, when you look at the more than 100-page, 100 employees on Burning Man's staff page, there's only one of them with any military experience that acknowledges it. But in fact, as we're going through here, you'll see that there's actually very many. So this guy, when he did his training to join the Navy, he actually trained at Naval Air Station Fallon, the base that's next, just over the mountain range from Burning Man. And he left the Navy. He was in Fairchild Semiconductor, 1967 to 1971.
That would make sense that somebody in the Navy would train in the middle of the desert, right?
Yeah, well, it's a big bombing range, so that's probably a good place for it. But yeah, the Navy's one of the largest employers in Nevada. Go figure. And so this guy here was a consultant to Caltrans, 1985, in intelligent transportation systems. Consultant to Apple, he built their first robotic manufacturing plant in Silicon Valley, probably in the world. And then he was part of the Mondo 2000 coterie from 1989 to 1992. and we're going to talk about that in a second too. But this magazine, Mondo 2000, was really the precursor and predecessor of Wired magazine, and it featured such writers as Timothy Leary, Robert Anton Wilson, Bruce Sterling, William Gibson, John Perry Barlow, many of these counterculture figures were there in this Mondo 2000 magazine.
And guys, in fact, that we already know are outed agents like Leary and Raw, etc.
Right. And then he went in and he set up the first network when Wired magazine was formed. He's the guy that went and wired back in 1992. And I've got a link in the notes here to something that's looking at how Wired fits into, basically Stuart Brand's group's activities and modus operandi, and also the elite Anglo-American establishment agenda of social engineering, basically Tavistock Group agenda, which is quite a fascinating read. But certainly these magazines, Mondo 2000 and then Wired, have been used to push the culture of the tech industry on the world, and they've also been used to push smart drugs, microdosing, LSD, Burning Man, all of these type of things that go hand in hand with the socially engineered artificial counterculture being used to sell the technology. I've got a clip that I'd like to play for this guy. He basically describing his connection between Burning Man, the tech industry, Mondo 2000 Party House, and the Stanford Chemistry Lab.
Well, briefly, I have a connection, of course, Silicon Valley. My roots there was involved with Fairchild Semiconductor about the beginning of the personal computer. And so I was involved with a lot of the technology that was happening, and I was involved with one of the first startup companies, Jasmine Computer System. We made hard drives for the Macintosh. So we were all hanging out a lot, and I was meeting people who were from Mondo 2000, which was the precursor of Wired magazine. And we were going to parties. I would go over to their house in Berkeley. They had connections to the Stanford Chemistry Lab, and they had drugs that had not been outlawed yet. It was flat on the edge. It was really crazy. So a lot of the connections came out of that tech industry because we knew each other. We hung out. And of course, I told them about this crazy thing.
Right, and then just the other thing to say before we move on from him is that he's very fond of wearing wacky costumes, but in particular fezzes. I've got quite a few different photos of him wearing a fez, which is a specific hat worn by some Freemason lodges, particularly within the Royal Order of Jesters. So the Mondo 2000 magazine, I've got a picture here of the guy, Are You Serious, who's the editor of Mondo 2000. His real name is Ken Goffman, and to many of your audience, it won't be a surprise to learn that he's Jewish. And he came up with this High Frontiers magazine originally, the space age newspaper of psychedelics, science, human potential, irreverence, and modern art. Then that became Mondo 2000, similar type thing. And then that became Wired magazine. And so the picture of Wired there, it's got John Perry Barlow with his cowboy hat with sort of the internet coming out of his head. That was the original mock-up for Wired magazine. They used that to go and raise the money to fund Wired. And then next to it is the actual first issue of Wired, what was on the cover. The Future of War. Bruce Sterling Has Seen the Future of War was the original cover of Wired magazine. So, there's yet another little sign that there's links to the military-industrial complex there, but also that this idea of Grateful Dead, The Well, cyberspace, Stuart Brand, Merry Pranksters, the convergence of it all, Wired would be the organ of that. Then I also have this story here just briefly about what is Mondo 2000. And this is from a project archiving some of the history of the magazine. Are You Serious? He tells a story about when he was staying at Timothy Leary's house, and he was invited to Trent Reznor from Nine Inch Nails' housewarming party. And Trent Reznor had just basically moved into the Charles Manson murder house where the Tate LaBianca murders happened, which was owned by Terry Melcher, Doris Day's son. So this is quite a famous house in the occult history of Laurel Canyon and the world. 9 Inch Nails guy takes it over, sort of similar to Jared Leto, a burner, took over the Lookout Mountain property that Dave McBowen spoke about, and that's his house now. But anyway, on their way to this party, Timothy Leary comes out with a mint dish filled with pink ecstasy tabs, offering them around. And so there you have it, people. Timothy Leary, a drug dealer, offering ecstasy and a legal Class A banned drug to people at a party, just handing them out like candies. And this is a trained psychiatrist. So look, I'm not taking a moralistic view that there's anything wrong with
well,
that.
Not to mention that Leary claimed before Congress in 1966 that he never promoted drugs like LSD.
Yeah. So there, look, the man is a drug pusher. I think he's been dead a long time now, but his work speaks for itself. And
the CIA's drug pusher.
Yeah, it's a drug pusher employed by the CIA, just like Aleister Crowley, a drug pusher, employed by military intelligence. One of the interesting things about these magazines, the High Frontiers and the Wire and everything, is their use of these very bright, primal, fluorescent colors. And that was something that came out in the 60s as well, the experiments of the hippies, this day glow. Why were the merry pranksters and their busts brought in these bright primary colors? And which, when your senses are being stimulated by some of these different narcotics, you probably respond quite positively to such bright colors. But the Cacophony Society newsletter was doing this before the High Frontiers and before the Mondo 2000 came out. So it seems like, we know that Cacophony Society members were hanging out at the Mondo 2000 party house and, were plugged into these mutually shared connections with the Stanford chemistry lab and drugs that weren't outlawed yet. But also here we have Cacophony Society members doing this bright fluoro thing that went on to kind of set the tone for Wired as well. That's a very interesting coincidence. But here we have an example of the Cacophony newsletter. This is the first time that we ever see the words Burning Man. And this is where the story really starts to get intriguing for me. Because at this time, they're having a party for the Burning Man on June the 3rd, 1989. And then the Burning Man event itself is June the 24th, 1989. So the official first Burning Man was June the 1st, 1986. So 87 the second, 88 the third. This would be the fourth time they've had this annual event on the beach, creating an effigy and setting fire to it. But it's never been called Burning Man before that, and it's always been called Burning Man or Burning Man. It's been called correctly, as the founders call it, Burning Man, ever since it appeared in this newsletter. So the other coincidence that's very interesting in this newsletter is what else is on the page. And it appears in the newsletter with this thing called a shredding party for Ollie. And let me read that to you. It's at Army and Mission Street, which is it's not called Army Street in San Francisco anymore. But Oliver North is coming to the Circle Star Theatre, San Carlos, the morning of June 14th. On the night before, we are going to conduct a preemptive strike with a Cacophony tailgate party in the theatre parking lot. From this command post, we shall deploy a volunteer team to place sensitive electronic listening devices around the building. As a diversionary tactic, we will conduct a public reading and destruction of secret documents, which is capitalized, from the back of a truck-mounted shredding machine. After these clandestine operations are complete, we shall all retire to comfort of the mobile command post for a victory celebration. Suggested equipment, tape recorders, cameras, identification papers, a bottle of your favorite vintage, and $1 for expenses. The wearing of a full dress uniform will assure you a commanding position within the ranks. So here's an event like Oliver North, again, connected to the Bush family, connected to Iran-Contra and drug dealing. And in some of the testimony related to the Franklin scandal, a guy called Rusty Nelson, he said, although this was to a journalist afterwards and not testimony in court, so you've got to take that for its worth, but he said that Colonel Michael Aquino, he witnessed him handing a suitcase full of bearer bonds over to Oliver North. So there we have another coincidence that the Satanists were potentially linked in with Satanist Citations, linked in with this Oliver North guy as well. And it, in some ways would make sense for Aquino to be involved in that role because, he did have an investment banking background. But this type of mission, they're setting up a command post, they're putting these listening devices there, they're dressing in military uniforms. Is this really an idea of fun, or is this actually kind of like a psyop, Because imagine if there were actual protesters there to disrupt Oliver North and to make things difficult for him. Well, and then imagine that this cacophony group could be controlled by North and his army. Then you could enlist these cacophonists against the protesters. They could disrupt anything. They could distract anything at any time. They could ridicule any legitimate protesters by appearing to be part of them and then acting in crazy ways, including agent provocateur stuff style where they get arrested.
Yep.
And this is all the tactics that we see, happening today with Black Lives Matter, with these
Antifa, etc.
Antifa, it's called now. Yeah, a bunch of fascists that call themselves Antifa. These Satanists love to use irony, and so it's a very, very unusual. Okay, like we're going to make a secret society and we're going to go break into bunkers at the Presidio and we're going to sneak up the Golden Gate Bridge. Right? I get it. That makes sense. But we're going to plant listening devices around an Oliver North presentation in military uniforms. It's like, is that because it's funny? I don't know. It's very, very unusual as a form of entertainment. But if you were, in fact, military intelligence and you were wanting to recruit people that you could use for these type of Alinskyite, social, political cover operations, how else would you do it? This would be a great way. And the Cacophony Society itself, it's a clearinghouse of a calendar of events clearinghouse where anyone who wants to do anything creative, entertaining, or adventurous involving other people can list their event. So this is before the World Wide Web. They're kind of creating a Craigslist type of thing. But anyone is welcome. And this idea is transferred into Burning Man as well with this radical inclusion. I should also note that the description of the Cacophony Society, and the sort of activities that they were doing, it really does seem to fit the stuff from Jim Channon in the 1st Earth Battalion manual that we outlined, that the future of the military would be these people going out and doing, engaging with people socially rather than with force of arms, playing music to them or giving them a sheep or whatever. It's the ultimate cover. If they're busted in one of these operations, they can say, hey, we were just goofing around in this silly society. So, hey, you guys go infiltrate the Nazis. But if the neo-Nazi group is pissed that they got infiltrated, it's like, well, okay, we can see that this is just some idiot acid heads. Don't worry about them, Right. The other thing is having access to designer drugs that haven't been outlawed yet from the Stanford Chemistry Lab. I bet that makes you a popular person at, many different groups that you want to infiltrate, It's like, hey, here's this new guy that's got this great acid. Let's invite him to our next party.
Sure. Yeah, or if you're, running the lab, et cetera, for Sasha Shulgin and helping dish the stuff out for the DEA, et cetera,
Yeah. And then I've got a couple of images here from the newsletter that came after this one when the Burning Man had actually happened. And it said, our aim is to inspire awe with a reverence verging on fear and delight. So their aim is inspiring these religious-like kind of sensations with this effigy that they're burning. Their aim isn't entertainment or creating an alternative society. So I want to also now really just drill into the dates and bring this back to Michael Michaels. So he's joined the Cacophony Society and become the editor of it, right? So coming ahead to this next thing here. So in court testimony, so I'm looking at the bottom left of the slide in the beginning, but in court testimony in 2007, he confirmed the claim made by John Law, the other co-founder of Burning Man, that they, as the Cacophony Society, both attended Burning Man at Baker Beach for the first time in June 1989. And he also confirmed that the words Burning Man were first used in that newsletter I just showed you, and he was the editor of the newsletter at the time. So look at the sequence of events. This ex-Navy guy has come in and joined the Cacophony Society as the editor of their newsletter And he's joined mid to late 1989, according to John Law. So for this newsletter to come out talking to events June the 2nd, 1989, this is pretty much the first thing that he's done. He's come into this Cacophony Society, edited basically his first newsletter, and in it is this Oliver North, everyone dress up in military uniforms, and he happens to be a guy who likes to dress up in military uniforms for fun. And at that time, somebody, somewhere, then nobody is standing up saying this was me, has come up with this name Burning Man, that we're going to call this event Burning Man. And it stuck. And all these people, all these egos involved, and in this case specifically lawsuits being involved, why does this guy not say, I came up with the name of it being Burning Man and put it in the newsletter in 1989? Why does nobody say? And where did this name come from? Well, it turns out that this year was a major release of the CIA's database of 12 million online searchable records from the National Archives. And we've had a few people contact me say, hey, Steve, is there anything in that CIA release about Burning Man? And as you can imagine, the first thing that I did when I heard that this was out there was I went and typed in Burning Man. And to my amazement, this is what came up, these two papers here, that the term Burn Man is a specific CIA intelligence community term. And it relates specifically to the destruction of documents. So these two documents here from 1966, they're talking about a problem where the CIA had to dispose of 920 cubic feet of records no longer needed by the agency.
So down at Baker Beach, et cetera, every year, they're probably burning tons of clandestine documents, et cetera, to get them out of there.
Yeah, well, I mean, do you want to bet how many of this 920 feet of documents pertain to MK Ultra? As I think Joe said on a recent show, there was 15% of the CIA's budget. So this is a large project that we have no documents of. But anyway, the thing about these records is that there's a backlog in physical destruction because of these special records, and these special records could not be actually destroyed because whoever it was that had the job of doing document destruction for the CIA didn't have a high enough level security clearance to get rid of the records. So they needed to wait for the Burn Man to get the appropriate level security clearance. And then they could do the document destruction. So the words Burn Man, CIA term, turns into Burning Man. And the first time it appears is when the Cacophony Society is doing this military event for Oliver North, specifically about document destruction. They're having a truck to do this special shredding, right?
It's comedy.
Yeah. So
good old CIA slapstick, you know.
Yeah, you gotta ring the coincidence meter like hell for this. And then just to ring it again, Jan, when we began the series, we were attacked by this homeless guy, Douglas Dietrich, who claimed to have done this specific job. He said that he was the Burn Man. And yet this guy has never, ever thought to talk about how Burning Man, the satanic event, started next to the Presidio where he allegedly was working while he was allegedly working there as the Burn Man.
Right. And then he, of course, comes out with Professor Daryl Hamamoto slandering us and filed false copyright claims against your and my videos and had them temporarily taken down from YouTube to stall the spread of all of this. But, here he is and Daryl Hamamoto and all these guys right in the middle of this damn thing.
Yeah. So anyway, this document here, it shows again Dietrich's claims to be false, that if the CIA had documents that were too classified to destroy, they get the clearance for the appropriate person to do the destruction. Otherwise, no destruction happens. They don't give it to the nearest 14-year-old kid whose dad used to be in the Navy in Taiwan that come by the base
and works in the basement of in the imaginary basement.
The imaginary basement of a building that we went into. That's
hilarious. That's
right.
For those who don't know what Steve and I are talking about, Steve and I actually went to the Presidio back in September and went to the library where Douglas Dietrich claims to have worked in the basement destroying these documents. And in fact, no basement exists in the building.
No basement and no chimney of any kind.
Right, exactly.
Furnaces.
Complete make-believe.
Anyway, look, maybe that's a coincidence. Maybe there's some other explanation of how they came up with this name Burning Man when they had never been to Burning Man before. But I think
I'm not much of a coincidence theorist. I'll leave you to.
So let's come back to this guy Michael, and so this is his official profile. And for many years, this is when you go to the Burning Man website. This is what you'd read. It's on his own website. They made the Burning Man website a bit more corporate in their last revision, so they've toned it down a bit. But and I'm going to read the whole thing. Sorry for taking up the time here, but Danger Ranger is the legendary protector of our desert society. Some say he's the seventh son, born of the scion of a seventh son. Others claim he possesses near borderline supernatural powers, including the ability to bilocate and appear at two places simultaneously. This seems plausible given his penchant for pervading the playa. In 1992, he founded the Black Rock Rangers, an institution patterned on the Texas Rangers and their historical role as guardians of a dispersed frontier society. Beyond the Black Rock Desert, Danger is known to his friends and co-workers as Michael, which is his actual name. He joined the project in 1990 and he oversees the security and survival of the Burning Man community. He oversees security. He also created the first Burning Man mailing list database, produced the first issue of the Black Rock Gazette, established the Burning Man archive, and drove the first art car to the Black Rock Desert. In 2001, he visited regional communities during his tour of America as an ambassador for Burning Man. So this rave needs an ambassador in regional communities.
Tour of America, would that be like a tour of Vietnam or something?
Possibly. In addition, Michael functions as the guiding light, Illuminati, of San Francisco's famous Cacophony Society, a randomly gathered, sure it is, network of free spirits united in pursuit of experience beyond the mainstream.
Mm-hmm.
He's a strong interest in the mysteries of time, space, and consciousness, along with an engineering systems background in computers and robotics. His Silicon Valley career began with Fairchild Semiconductor just a few years before it gave birth to Intel. After 1984, he served as a robotics consultant to Apple Computer and later engineered the rise and fall of Jasmine Computer Systems. Always riding the edge, he contributed to the Mondo 2000 house in Berkeley and Wired magazine's first office in San Francisco. His wide range of experiences include having been a combat veteran in Vietnam and a federal fugitive in the United States. Other past activities include involvement with Machine Performance Group survival research laboratories. Throughout the year, M2 lends his guidance and wisdom to navigate Burning Man into the future. His official title is Director of Genetic Programming, and he performs his best work at 3 a.m. So this is a very flowery, fascinating kind of story, the sort of story a lifetime actor would have. Is it true? And are there any? Can we find any problems or holes in this story? Well, it doesn't add up. He says he's the seventh son, born of the scion of a seventh son, but from Ancestry.com, he appears to be an only child, and he doesn't really appear to be from a particularly prominent family. Although I found one of his ancestors who was a baron, but. Some of the other people in this story have come from elite families. He doesn't really seem like he's the scion of another seventh son or anything. And, he's got no college degree as far as we know, and he's got no obvious robotics or electronics training. When he did his Navy class, he came seventh out of a class of 18. So, how do you go to be the guy that Apple, which at the time when Apple made their first manufacturing robotic facility, I believe it was for the Mac or for the Lisa, and, Apple was the hottest company in the world, and the tech industry was just emerging. This is like the major strategic thing of America, right? And Apple as the flagship. And who are we going to get to build the factory? A guy with no training, Not only that, he has got a 14-year black hole in his resume. So he says that he worked at Fairchild a few years before it gave birth to Intel, but Intel started in 1968 with a bunch of people that spun out of Fairchild Semiconductor. He says he worked there at 67 to 71, and in fact, it would have had to be pretty late in 67, I think. So that story's wrong. There's a contradiction in his story right there. I mean, and surely you would have. Remember, if you worked at Fairchild Semiconductor and all the top execs and founders of the company left to create Intel, you'd probably remember that happening. You wouldn't get it out by a few years when you only worked there a few years. So he just disappears after this. He's in the hottest startup in history, Fairchild Semiconductor, that gave birth to many of Silicon Valley, multiple trillions of dollars in value. And then the next thing, he shows up doing the system for Caltrans, which is also extremely sophisticated. I've got a diagram there of what intelligence transportation systems are. And it's basically what we call today the Internet of Things. And it's linking up a whole bunch of different electronic sensors to get a real-time view of what's going on. And this was super advanced stuff in 1985. So where did this guy go for 14 years? What was he doing in that whole time? He shows up and he goes and does these two major projects, and then he's described later by John Loras as being unemployed in the entire time that that he was known, other than working in this neon sign business. I mean, who makes a robot plant for Apple and then goes into a neon sign business with a transsexual prostitute? This is where the skills of the trivium, such as the logic and the grammar, can really apply, because it doesn't work from logic, and also the grammar they're using is inaccurate. And if we find the correct grammar, suddenly a different picture of logic emerges. And
realizing that a contradiction is always a liar and error, because there's no contradictions in nature.
Definitely. So, why would a former federal fugitive throw the largest event on government land, on federal land, which happens to be also like a massive drug event like that? Well, that just seems like asking for trouble, doesn't it? And then why was this guy a federal fugitive in the first place? That's never officially addressed, although we will get to that in a second. And then also, Caltrans, Apple, and Wired, they're trusting this guy with their crown jewels, a federal fugitive with a 14-year black hole in his resume. So something doesn't add up here. So I dug a bit deeper, and this is the cruise book via Ancestry.com of the boat that he was on in the Navy. He was assigned to the USS Marcab. And so when he says he was a combat veteran, this is the boat that he was supposedly the combat veteran on. And as far as I can tell, he was only on this boat in his tour in the Navy. I've got no information that he was on any boat other than this. Now, there's a picture of the Marcab here. If you look to the right where it says, "This is what we did," there are half a dozen destroyers. And this is, I believe, in Subic Bay in the Philippines. And they're parked next to this gigantic repair ship. So a repair ship, it's big, and it's very, very slow. And it might have a couple of guns, but it's the last thing you would ever want to send into a combat zone. If a repair ship was involved in combat, that would be a significant event in naval history. That's not the type of thing that happens that often. So again, we're showing some logical flaws here. Hang on, he's a combat veteran on this repair ship. And then you go through the cruise book and you look at what did they actually do on this ship. And there's this thing, they had a talent show. They're having small arms practice off the back. It's a sailor's paradise. They're having fishing competitions. They have a girl in every port. Josie is the cute one. Uriono, the big one, There's a picture of Michael and the Merry Marcab's crew. I mean, these guys just look like they're having a great old time. There's people dressed up as King Neptune. It's party. And then go to Subic Bay, Philippines to service these other ships. So was this boat ever in Vietnam? One of the other things that comes up in the cruise book that's very interesting is that they had a ceremony called Crossing the I-80. And when they arrived at the international date line, this ceremony is the first of its type on record. They were initiated in going through the sacred golden dragon's domain. And they were cleansed in the dragon's tail with salt water, while the salts who had been over before laughed it up. Well, first of all, if this is the first ceremony of its kind, how had any salts been over before? But we've got a picture there of they're all doing this sort of human. You've seen a South Park episode of the Human Centipede. That's what it makes me think of all these people, on their hands and knees crawling along and getting hosed down with water, and then they have to go prostrate themselves before King Neptune and his staff. And it's interesting about the ceremony crossing the line. There's two coincidences there. One is, and I think we showed this in the last episode, Michael when he first brought the Cacophony people out to Burning Man, he drew a line in the sand in the desert. And he said, when we step over this line, we're entering into a different world, and everything after it will be different and nothing will be the same. So when he did that, he was basically reenacting an initiation and an occult initiation ceremony into the Golden Dragon that he went through when he was in the Navy. That's a coincidence. And then it's also, they called it crossing the I-80. And when you go to Burning Man, the I-80 is the main freeway that you take up there from San Francisco to get to Nevada.
Oh, come on, that's just a coincidence.
Perhaps that one just as a coincidence.
No, I mean, there's no way it's just a coincidence.
But then we also mentioned in the previous episode where we're looking at some of the people that attend Burning Man, that David de Rothschild was a huge Burning Man fan, and that he did an occult ceremony when he sailed across the Pacific in the Plastiki boat. When he crossed the international date line, he brought out his Burning Man top hat, his most prized possession, to do a special magical ceremony. So the Rothschilds are recreating Danger Ranger's military initiation ceremony in honor of Burning Man. Let's ring the coincidence meter again for that.
Ding, ding.
The other thing that they did when they were in this boat sailing around the Pacific was they participated in this thing called Operation Hand Clasp. And this is basically a psychological operation that the Navy conducted to win the hearts and minds of the other people in Asia. So the war in Vietnam, officially was about keeping the Chinese and the communists in check. Unofficially was about switching the locus of the heroin trade from Turkey, Corsica, Marseille to the Golden Triangle coming through the US military. And then I guess somewhere in between those two objectives was, well, we need to have a strong US presence in Asia and have the rest of the countries in Asia wanting to stick with the Americans and not go with the communists. And so part of that is this thing, Hand Clasp, where they're handing out, 20, 30,000 school books and things like that. And the sailors are going to all these different schools and they're bringing all these school children on the boat. And we got some photos there of like kids from an orphanage being led onto this military ship. I really, really hope like hell that those kids all got back to that orphanage and made it out in one piece. Because when you look at some of the revelations that have come out in connection to the military involvement in child porn and child sex trafficking, it's horrific, it's deep, and it goes back a long, long time. But they seem to be doing a lot of that. Perhaps it was good for the goodwill and morale of the soldiers and the troops. They went and painted a couple of schools, kind of shades of what the Burners Without Borders and Jim Channon's 1st Earth Battalion type people are doing today. The military goes to paint a school. That's how we win the mine war. Another thing I just want to highlight from this slide of the Navy book is a photo of these two handsome young Asian men, Vietnamese Rangers, in their crisp little uniforms. And I wonder if that was any inspiration for this guy calling the Black Rock Desert group the Rangers. We showed earlier that he says it's modeled on the Texas Rangers when he founded it in 1992. But in a previous episode, we showed the Cacophony newsletter in 1990 describing the Black Rock Desert Rangers that would be out there. So sort of disproves this guy's stories yet again. So let's to have a look at this repair ship, USS Markham. Now, I've got the two of the chart books there from its voyages, and it says where it went: Taiwan, Japan, Subic Bay, and for the second voyage, for a period of 16 days, they were in Vung Tau, South Vietnam, which is where the U.S. naval base and fleet in Vietnam was. So, that's not exactly the combat zone. The nature of naval combat in Vietnam was what they call riverine combat. I don't know if you remember John Kerry with the swift boat for truth, But they were in these swift boats with guns, and they were going up the rivers in the Mekong, and they were like, trying to take on these, highly moving guerrilla fighters of the North Vietnamese army. And the action was these river boats going up the rivers. It wasn't these big destroyers and aircraft carriers. That was more World War II when that happened.
Or much less a repair boat.
And much less a repair boat. But there were actually, the Navy had 2 repair boats that were stationed in Vietnam throughout the war at the naval base in Vung Tau. And as it turns out, that this boat, Markham, it was there once, and it came in to relieve one of the repair boats at Vung Tau. So there was a big dispute about it being in Vietnam, and a crew member lost a benefits lawsuit to the VA over it. But then the VA later came out and acknowledged that this boat did go to Vietnam. And it earned a Vietnam War patch in November 67 when it was there for 16 days in the relief mission for other repair ships. During this time, there was an incident where they fired 86 shells of harassment fire. And you can actually see the picture there in their guidebook of them doing the harassment fire. And so this incident, there were some suspected rebels in a nearby forest on the land that they were sailing past. And so they used the ship's guns to shell the suspected position, hoping that they would smoke out the rebels. So if you read the notes to this slide, I've got a lot of links to the information that I'm presenting here. But what one commentator has said, this has all the signs of a self-generated mission. And they go on to say that for a lot of people in the Vietnam War, it was frustrating that they weren't actually in the war itself, and they wanted to get a taste of the action. And so you can see for a crew like this that had been on tours throughout Asia for years and had even been in Vietnam, but they weren't in combat, but they wanted that combat patch. The captain's like, okay, look, rebel position. Yeah, we're going to call in these strikes, shoot the guns. Okay, we were in combat. But you look at that picture there of the harassment fire, and they're not wearing flak jackets, bulletproof vests. They do have some helmets on. The one guy on the front, he's sitting down. He looks like super chilled. They all look very, very relaxed to me, right? Like if you look, first of all, in combat, nobody is sitting there taking these photographs, like posing for pictures or whatever. In actual combat, the photographer's going to be hiding, and this looks like they're up on an exposed position to get a nice aerial shot of this going on. So was the boat in combat? Well, really the only incident I can point to is this one incident of harassment fire. So then the next question is, well, was this guy on the boat during this combat incident? And we'll move to that in a second. But I want to say one of the other things that the boat was involved with that come from a former crew member is when they were in Subic Bay in the Philippines. I've got a picture down there of aircraft carriers. So there's the USS Enterprise. It's the middle picture on the right, which was the largest aircraft carrier ever made, still one of the biggest ships ever built. And then the Marcab is pretty close to that. It's the fourth largest vessel in the picture, but it's about half the size of the Enterprise, right? So you wouldn't send it to combat, but what they were doing is that they were installing new cryptography satellite communications information into these boats and aircraft carriers at Subic Bay. So now there's an angle to this mission that why was this third repair ship sent into Vietnam anyway? Because it only relieved the two operating Vietnam repair ships at the very, very end of its mission. So, what was it doing? And it turns out it was putting in this advanced cryptography equipment. So that's like a SIGINT mission. And as well, it was doing this psychological operations, which is a human mission. So these are maybe some signs that there was some intelligence community work going on this repair ship. This repair ship also had a computer on board in like 1964 to have an at-sea computer. Like, that's very, very unusual. Why does a repair ship need a computer in the first place? And looking at, there were two captains while Michael was on this ship that are of particular note. One of them, Captain Gibson, he was the commanding officer of Naval Reserve Training and the director of Naval Reserves. And after he was on this repair ship, he went straight to be the Special Assistant for Reserve Affairs for Undersecretary of the Navy. Now, that wasn't on the basis of all the combat repairs that the ship did, because it really didn't do any. It never even went to the war. So, and was it because they did such a great job at painting schools that this guy goes and gets a promotion? Or was it the intelligence mission, And then the other guy that they had before him was a guy called Captain Hopner, who was a signals and communications specialist, and he was in charge of public relations for the entire 7th Fleet. So the Navy decided that although, doing public relations was important, it was more important to paint some schools, get their PR guy on their third repair ship and send them away. I mean, again, both of those things don't add up in the light of logic. There's something else going on. And when you know that they were installing the satellite equipment, I think that's a sign of intelligence work. So now to speculate, because this statement that, he's the seventh son born of the scion of a seventh son, it's never been explained. So I'm going to postulate an explanation. He was in the 7th Fleet, right? And so if he left the 7th Fleet and he went into the Naval Reserves, and his boss went into the Naval Reserves as well for the Secretary of the Navy, the SON, then you could see how that's sort of like the 7th son of the 7th son. But you've also got the 7th SOG, which is Special Operations Group or Psychological Operations Group. And the 7th Psychological Operations Group that was at the Presidio, where Lieutenant Colonel Michael Aquino was the Deputy Director of Reserve Training for Military Intelligence Reserves, that actually came out of the SOG in Vietnam. So how does someone bilocate and have the ability to be in two places at the same time? Well, if you're military intelligence in the Naval Reserves, you can appear at Burning Man as a neon sign maker that makes signs, but you can also appear at the debriefing back at the Naval Command Center as a naval officer with intelligence training. And you're playing both roles simultaneously. So, did he go back from his combat mission and then go into this dual role as an ONI reserve at a civilian desk at Fairchild? It would make sense why Fairchild Semiconductor, who 2/3 of their business was supplying the military government, why they would want to hire this guy who had field experience installing the cryptography equipment. He doesn't need a college degree. He's worked on the gear. We need that guy. Sure, that makes sense. And then what did he do? Secret missions for 14 years? Or that makes sense as well. Otherwise, what else did he do? So just moving on to prove, was this guy in Vietnam when his boat, the Markhab, was in this incident of so-called combat? And this is from a service record retained by FOIA request from a professional military researcher. And it says that he was his date of service ends April 21st, 1967. Transferred to the Naval Reserve Manpower Center at Bainbridge, Maryland. So that looks to me like he left the boat, entered the Naval Reserves, and went to work for Fairchild. And here we have, during the Vietnam War, USS Markhab was in Vietnamese Counteroffensive Phase 3, 3rd to 22nd November 1967. So even if you accept that them firing 86 shells of harassment fire was being in combat, there's no way he was on the boat then, according to his military record. So his claim of being a combat veteran in Vietnam is a lie, which is stolen valor, unless actually he was a secret agent and he'd returned to Vietnam in complete undercover missions and then was in the line of fire. However, there's no evidence to suggest that at all. I think the evidence points much more likely that this guy joined the Naval Reserves. So the other question is, why was he a fugitive from the police? And now this is from the book This is Burning Man by Brian Doherty. Michael was a former computer industry entrepreneur, old enough to have been part of the drug sex ferment that made the 60s the 60s. He has a long history of being involved in adventures designed to turn on the world. He once told a gripping tale about being pulled over and charged with possession by Texas cops many years ago. It turned into a comic adventure chase scene in which he's taking out fences and keep right signs are peeling over his hood like strands of overcooked spaghetti. And he's throwing himself in ditches and spending 3 days running through fields for his freedom. He knew they'd have killed him if they caught him. He hired a good lawyer and it all got straightened out well enough. So this is the only story I can find anywhere in the history of Burning Man or this guy that suggests why that when he says he's a former federal fugitive, here's a story of him being a fugitive from justice. Now, why is it federal? Did he cross state lines in this escape? Was there federal agencies involved? The other thing is, okay, he's been pulled over for possession, right, by the cops. Now, you'd think that might mean he had a joint in the ashtray or something. What quantity of drugs do you have to possess for there to be a 3-day manhunt for you? I mean, even if they pull the guy over and he's got a pound of marijuana in the car, I can't imagine a 3-day manhunt, even back in the day, right? And then the next thing is he's saying that during this manhunt, he's gone and committed additional crimes. He's resisting arrest, fleeing arrest, damaging damaging property, so he's made this thing more complicated by committing more crimes, but then by getting this good lawyer, he just got it all straightened out. So, how does a lawyer get something like that straightened out? Now, maybe he got straightened out, he pled guilty and went and did time for this, and that's what happened to him for that 14 years. But I don't know, that doesn't seem that likely. We've got a photo of them there posing in front of the Victor Masonic Club for Masons only. And it seems a lot more likely to me if you're in trouble with some good old boy cops and you want the law bent in your favor, you turn to the secret society who pulls some strings and get you out of trouble. So, this is speculation. I don't know why he was a federal fugitive, but this is the only story that we have to go on. Now, as well as all as the many firsts that this guy did at Burning Man, he brought the first shipping container to Burning Man. And ring the coincidence meter again, it's a military unit. It's a special custom-built aerospace military unit designed to be a third of the weight of a standard steel container and transported around by helicopter. And it was used in Vietnam, most probably for psychological operations. So the first shipping container at Burning Man, yeah, that's a military unit. This guy's got, and he's brought it out is to connect real-world Burning Man with virtual worlds on the internet. They named it Zero after a character in Rollerball. The central brain, the world's brain, fluid mechanics, fluidics. He's liquid, you see. His waters touch all knowledge. Now, this is very similar to in 1998 when Google was launched basically at Burning Man, that they brought out this thing, the nebulous entity, which was, connecting all of the world's knowledge into a central brain and search engine. That was also tied to Army Reserve recruiting. This thing here, it says Dr. Danger's time-traveling medicine show, everything you see and more. This is a painting that's hung on the side of this military container. If you drill into this, it says everything you see and more. Well, there's a UFO there. There's a big radio mast antenna, and it's broadcasting a spiral. And if you remember back in the days of Alex Jones, he used to have those spinning spirals behind him when he talked, a mind control symbol. So that's kind of a symbol of mind control coming out of the official transmission tower. He's got E equals MC squared. He's got two clocks, one of them set to 4:20, and the other one is set to 555, obviously 5, the number of the Pentagon, and also a satanic number. They've got an eyeball with wings, the all-seeing eye. There are also 5 stars on this image. Again, that Pentagon and satanic number. The sun and the moon, a cult, and time traveling, and a medicine show. So what's a medicine show is, this is someone who's purveying some kind of like liquid kind of sacrament or potion to heal all of your ills. So here's a guy who's admitted to being a connection to the Stanford chemistry lab, the tech industry, and Burning Man, coming out with this military psyop looking container and a traveling medicine show. It's like, yeah, what sort of medicine do you think is being dispensed inside?
Joe was doing some research on that top hat theme as well, and of course we see him there wearing a top hat. But
yep, and Crowley was wearing a top hat, and this guy wears top hats on many different occasions.
Right, and Jerry Garcia was often seen wearing a top hat, et cetera. So this seems to be part of the symbology.
Yep. I wouldn't surprise me in the least. And then also in this container, they have this machine. They have an electric thinking machine. So, he's not kidding about this being the world's brain. He's just like, and look at all the antennas equipment sticking up from this this container. It looks like it has functioning and operational electronic equipment in it, including an air conditioner. So, yeah, this is sort of sophisticated stuff going on here. And then I just want to wrap up on this guy talking about his ability to bilocate, because this comes from, not only does it come from Crowley, but it's also connected to the Presidio once again. So we've talked about how the Stanford Research Institute and the Church of Scientology were working with military intelligence at the Presidio on these remote viewing type of projects, such as Grill Flame was one of them, but also Project Scan8 and Project Stargate. In this Project Grill Flame being conducted at the Presidio, they were attempting to bilocate. So this guy's saying he has the ability to bilocate. There's a coincidence. There's an ex-Navy guy, very likely to be reserve intelligence, very likely to have come up with the name Burning Man from the CIA Burn Man document destruction thing, involved with these Presidio projects, or wanting to drop the hint that he was involved by putting this word bilocate into his resume. And if he's not trying to drop the Presidio hint, perhaps he's talking about Crowley, who was reported to have this magical ability. And then on the Cacophony Society, it's a social organization for eccentric individuals. It provides an alternative for those who don't want to fit into normal society. Now, it's interesting that he thinks about it this way, because the Cacophony, their own newsletter and materials didn't really describe it that way. But this is basically, let's find the freaks and misfits and give them something where, they could feel like at home, and then they'll go along with these crazy kind of hijinks. And if anyone looks into them, they really seem to be total weirdos. And Burning Man's taken this aspect of Burning Man, radically include the freaks and misfits. They still see that as a very, very core part of their DNA. And now that it's got very glamorous, and you've got Victoria's Secret models wearing next to nothing and incredibly elaborate outfits, Burning Man's like, oh, no, we don't want that. Any other promoters in the world will think, yeah, that's great. We've got a nice crowd now. Joe Schmo in his basement who can't get a date, if he stays home, it will be no great loss to us. Burning Man would much rather have the Joe Schmoes and new ones, fresh meat coming through this machine all the time. So they're proving that creative individuals can exercise a wider variety of expression and still remain a cohesive social group. Well, that doesn't really sound like a great idea for recreation to me, to prove social grouping. So who are they proving this for? It's a project for somebody yet again. So he's also said in the Reno Gazette Journal, when we first came out to the desert, we came through Gerlach, and the locals would see all these characters with tattoos, purple hair, and piercings everywhere. Going to burn this wooden man in the desert, and the first thing they thought is they're a bunch of Satanists. And then later on he says, well, we had guns and we'd have shooting events and invite the locals. And Nevada's a frontier. When we invited them to go shooting, they have a lot of fun. And they think maybe they're Satanists, but they are Satanists with guns, so they're okay. Now, this is, people think, well, this Outtrim guy he's making up that Burning Man's anything to do with being Satanist. Here's the founder of Burning Man saying to the press, we're Satanists. It's like, he could have said they're occultists, or they're freaks, or they're deadheads, or he could have used any word, but he specifically repeated the word Satanist 3 times. And that's how they were seen by the locals. I've got a picture here of Satan's throne, which was at Burning Man last year. A few people sent me Instagram shots and stuff of that. And, the satanic element is absolutely still at Burning Man today. It's still there. You don't have to look very hard for it at all. I've also got a picture of the Burning Man burning, and you can see in the frame there is that shape of the double cross, which may not necessarily be a satanic symbol. It may just be an occult branch of Christianity. I don't know if you know anything about that,
Yeah, I know. I don't see it in the image, though. I'll have to stare at it.
Yeah, well,
wait. Okay.
The shape of the Burning Man, it's like a cross with 2 bars going across it.
Yeah, I do see it. So yeah, you're right. Huh.
And I think that those
that's Orthodox Christianity, isn't it?
Okay. I think it's a term from Freemasonry as well, the double cross and the hoodwink.
Yeah, absolutely it is. Yes, you're right.
So I'm going to move quickly now through some of these other ones. This character, P. Segal, is a little bit peripheral to the story, but basically the first Burning Man and Cacophony Society adventures were planned in her penthouse apartment, the top floor of 1907 Golden Gate Avenue. Her last name, Segal, I guess. It's all variants of the same name. Again, quite a Jewish name, Bugsy Siegel.
Right.
The gangster, which we showed in our 50 years of Flower Power, that he actually had a connection to San Francisco and the counterculture there. And this lady was also hanging out in the North Beach scene with Allen Ginsberg and Gregory Corso. So it's an indirect link, but that is a connection between Cacophony and the Beats. And Kevin Evans and Carrie Galbraith, we've talked about them before. They were the Cacophony members who planned Zone Trip number 4. Sebastian Hyde was also quite a prominent guy. In this slide, if you read the notes of it, I've tried to actually list all the names of all the significant people at Burning Man that we can't really talk about today, but people can go through and read about some more of them. This lady is considered an official founder of Burning Man, Harley Dubois. We've played a few clips from her already. She looks a bit different these days. She's saying that in 1991, she was living in a household with a bunch of people that ended up being the founders, the movers and shakers who made it all happen. Now, from what I can piece together of the history, the only household that possibly could have been was this lady P. Segal's house where the Cacophony Society excursions were planned. So these shakers and movers that made everything happen at Burning Man were living in this household. That isn't any of the official founders. That isn't. So that's a clue that there were people making this Burning Man thing happen beyond what we're officially told. So she didn't go to the first one. They came back all dusty, decided to go for the second one. She said, I've never actually been to Burning Man. Ever since my first year, I have worked the event. That year, I was serving breakfast to the crew, so I've never just been a participant. I'm not sure what I would know what to do with myself as a participant. Now, the thing about Burning Man is it's all supposed to be about gifting. So if you go to Burning Man and you're like giving something to someone else, like serving them breakfast, you're not doing that as a job because you're being paid to do it. You're doing it out of the spirit of gifting. This is the fundamental ethos of Burning Man. But here's a founder of Burning Man saying that she's never been there and experienced it like that. It's only ever work. And she was hired to go to make breakfast. She says in the beginning she's the only person who got up at 6 o'clock in the morning and had enough coffee to satisfy everybody. So this, like, she get up at 6, go give coffee to all the partiers and then cook breakfast for them. That seems like what they brought her along for. Now, that later became this thing known as Java Cow. And this is a guy called Kimrick Smythe, who's an ex-Air Force explosives and demolitions expert, also one of the early founders of Burning Man. He would put this cow's head on and wander around the playa at sunrise, handing out this Java as Java Cow. And that sort of came on later on than when Harley was doing the 6 a.m. coffee run. It makes me wonder if the Java Cow thing was kind of an inside joke being named from her not really being a participant, but just being, hanging out there with the coffee. And I would think that in the coded language of these people, when it says I wasn't a participant, that probably means they didn't take the LSD, a bit like some of the members of the Grateful Dead. So anyway, this Java Cow thing comes in back in it when Sun Microsystems, which spun out of Stanford, produced the Java language in the early days of the internet. There's a lot of controversy about how Java got its name, the same way there's controversy about how Burning Man got its name. But Java was named by Kim Polisi. That's in most of the versions of events. And I've met Kim a couple of times. She was a figure on the internet back in the days of the 90s, and she used to be a burner. And the story that is, it's very hard to confirm this, but that she named Java after this Java Cow at Burning Man. So possibly there's a link between Java and this girl here. It's very, very remote. She married into the Dubois family, who are quite big Huguenots, settled in Staten Island. And then this lady quit. She resigned from Burning Man in 2007. And that was the thing that would reduce the tontine that controlled Burning Man down to 5 people. Now, rather than reducing this tontine, they decided to talk her into staying and to change the entire ownership structure of Burning Man to be given away for free to the non-profit that's now. So this is a little bit of a strange thing in the story that, this lady quits and then is still involved. And it's sort of all because of her quitting that Burning Man goes free. But I don't really have a lot more to say about her. Oh, look, when she first went out there, Michael gave her a notebook and said, "You've got 3 boxes on there. Go and check the boxes, and you can pull volunteers' names off them." I called every single solitary volunteer, and we got all the shifts filled. Now, this doesn't really make a lot of sense. What sort of person puts their name in a notebook and just gets a phone call saying, "Hey, we need you to come to the desert to do a shift," and that's it? They're there. They just agree instantly. Every single person agreed. Now, she's saying that not all of them actually showed up to do the shifts, but still, what sort of notebook is this, and how did this Cacophony Society person have it in his possession? Because the stuff in the Cacophony Society was like, "Hey, we're doing this. Come on down if you want." It wasn't come down and do a shift. We need you to do this. So that's a very interesting magical notebook that this guy had that she came into possession of. So a couple of quotes from her and from Larry Harvey. She says that we're good vessel creators. We supply a vessel for things to happen in, a container. And then Larry Harvey, he says, we decided to build a vessel to contain a community. We realized we had to create a real city. If you look at the newsletter in 97, it's one big propaganda sheet for community. That's when the litany began. Community, community, community. People grabbed onto it. So in 1997, they've started propaganda to create this as a community. And then Harley says, we don't use the word festival when we talk about Black Rock City and the Burning Man event. Festival implies something organized around commerce, and of course, Burning Man's not commercial. We've always called ourselves the project. We never really knew what we were going to be, we being the 3,000, 5,000 people it takes to make the secret infrastructure that makes this crazy thing happen. We're very good at being very discreet. We set it up and then we watch what happens in it. We pay attention and we nurture what is the good to the best of our ability. That weaves the 50,000 people who show up. So this language here, vessel, container, weaves, we're very discreet, secret infrastructure. This is all, occult sort of language, that they have this magical occult container, this vessel, and they want to bring in all the energy of Burning Man to this container. And I have a clip about that. Let's play that now.
So what we have this year coming is 60,000 people. And those people are all going to be affected. You people here today are the people from this moment on that creates the framework and the cauldron that will cook their souls. Okay? You're creating that cauldron. And so I hand this off. I hand this spike, the city, everything to you. It's dedicated to you and this moment going forward and the effect that we'll have on the world.
So that guy who's laying in the golden spike to begin Burning Man and to create the cauldron to cook the souls of all the burners, that's Will Roger, and this is his wife Crimson Rose, and she was attending Burning Man for a few years before Will. She lights the cauldron. It literally is a cauldron. There's a picture of it there, and the name of the cauldron is El Diablo, the she-devil. So they light a cauldron named the Devil to cook the souls of all of the burners. And this isn't something that stopped in 1996. That video was from their Spark movie about 3 years ago, from the trailer to it. So, they still see Burning Man as a cauldron to cook the souls. You don't have to sign a contract selling your soul anymore to go there. This lady, Crimson Rose, her background is basically an art model, dancer, and choreographer. She first went to Burning Man in 1991. She's responsible for the big elaborate fire dancing occult ritual that happens before each Burning Man, basically the opening ceremony. And her name, Crimson Rose, comes directly from Crowley, and I'll get into that on the next slide. But it's also the same, it's a fake name, it's not a real name. Most of these people use false names or aliases. But it happens to be the same name as her husband's former boss, Colonel Richard Rose, who was an advisor to the CIA. And we'll get into him a little bit later on as well. But there's a coincidence. It's the name's from Crowley 1. The name's related to a CIA guy that was her husband's boss. That's two coincidences there. The fact that the cauldron's called the Devil, I think that's even beyond being a coincidence now. That's inherent in the event. But she says, to me, that was really the journey of magic that I discovered, not only within myself, but in fire dance itself. In those days, everybody danced, but nobody danced with fire. What burners now enjoy out on the Esplanade is an evolution of many ancient dancing-based traditions, which only became more tribal once flames were introduced. I don't do poi and I don't do staff. My dancing is really handling torches in a bowl of fire, dipping them into the fire and laying that on my body. Sometimes called fleshing, this technique has been passed down through tribal civilizations for generations. It's sensual and intimate and sparks a very special rapport with fire, both for the viewer and the performer.
No native revivalism there.
Yeah, well, exactly. It's all the neo-tribal and the pagan. And fire magic is a form of magic. There can definitely be use of fire in white magic, but when you're getting into this fleshing and the sensual feeling of laying the fire on your body, and there's even elements of sadomasochism in that. If the fire is searing your skin and you're feeling a tinge of pain and sensation, this is very much black magic and Satanism, the flesh and sensuousness. This is the occult person of Burning Man. She's like putting on these black angel wings and going to light the man. You can see in the photo, the black and white photo here, Rose's fire. She has this magnifying glass and she's like casting her hand like a spell. They light this Devil Cauldron with the Rays of the Sun. The guy Larry Breed, who came up with Burning Man being in the Pentagon trash fence, he created a polished disc that they now use to focus the sun's rays. So this is the very, very much occult part of the symbol is this fire ritual, and it comes from her. And so her name coming from Aleister Crowley and her being an occultist is, that's obviously beyond just a coincidence. And it's specifically taken from one of Crowley's black magic rituals to summon an elemental spirit. Now, John Dee, who's a predecessor of Crowley, he's kind of the founder of British intelligence.
Right.
And also the Queen's first spy. And so we're seeing this again.
Somebody that Terence McKenna worshipped often.
Yeah. I mean, all these guys, they worship Dee, they worship Crowley, But they're all doing the same stuff. It's intelligence agents, secret societies, summoning demons and pentagrams and stuff like that. And so Crowley has reinterpreted John Dee channeling the Book of Enoch in his own book. And, it's another thing to note. Dee, Crowley, and Aquino, all military intelligence, they're all channeling these interdimensional beings. Crowley's one was called Lamb. Aquino's one was called Set. I guess Dee's one was called Enoch. And, it's the self-transforming machine elves that the McKennas of the world like to talk to as well.
Exactly.
So I won't read the whole thing. I'll just read a couple of highlights. "O mother, wilt thou never have compassion on the children of earth? Was it not enough that the rose should be red with the blood of thine heart, and that its petals should be 7 and by 7? Now, that's significant because San Francisco is known as the 7 by 7. And Crowley is known to have visited San Francisco at least twice in 1900 before the big earthquake, and again in 1915. So Crowley, in writing this, very well may have been aware of San Francisco being known as the 7 by 7. I don't know, there's probably occult, Kabbalistic, geometria kind of things tied to that 7 by 7 as well. But that's an interesting coincidence. And so there appears immediately in the ether a tremendous column of scarlet fire, whirling forth, rebounding, crying aloud, and about it are 4 columns of green and blue and gold and silver, each inscribed with writings in the character of the dagger. And the column of fire is the dancing among the pillars. Now it seems that the fire is but the skirt of the dancer, and the dancer is a mighty god. The vision is overpowering." And then a little bit later, "I am the mighty sorceress, the lust of the spirit. I lick up the lives of men, and their souls sparkle from mine eyes. Now it is clear what she has woven in her dance. It is the crimson rose of the 49 petals, and the pillars are the cross with which it is conjoined." So, she's taking her name, Crimson Rose, from an Aleister Crowley magical demon summoning spell about a fire dancer with the power of a mighty god who wants to, lick up the souls of all beholding her fire as a mighty sorceress and weave it together. And you'll see that. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, is there a reference there to the Rosicrucians as well, with the rose and the cross and everything?
I would say absolutely, and that's probably where Crowley was going with this stuff. But that's very, very interesting that this sort of language, not only you could say, look, in the early days, maybe there was some Wicker Man stuff, maybe there's some Church of Satan guys went to Burning Man or whatever, but now it's a big corporate thing. None of that's still there. But as you can see, not only are these satanic elements there, but even this language, this occult language of weaving souls and stuff like that, that's still there as well. And let me play a clip of that.
Boy, what does the man represent? I think he represents all of us. He's the collector of all the imagination and all the energy, and he consumes it all year long so that he can literally burn up like a phoenix.
The burner scene in San Francisco, in the burner community, it doesn't exist solely in the 1 week a year in Nevada. It's held together by all these other events that are going on year round, where it's the same DJs and the camps and the same people, and they go and listen to the same music and doing the same kind of stuff. They're probably doing the same drugs, So this year round scene is kind of a vital part of the community. And it's really not Larry Harvey and Crimson Rose and all these people that are creating that scene in any way. It's these the camps themselves, the DJs, the party promoters that are putting these events on, and the burners go because it's that's the DJ from my camp. I'm going to go support him. Likewise, these are people who are bringing 20, 30, 40,000 people out to an event. When they say, "Hey, we're going out to Burning Man and we're going to throw a huge big party there at our camp," a lot of their friends and contact list is going to come out. So these people don't get anywhere near as enough credit in the official history of Burning Man. The guy, Jörg, was originally going to be a member of the LLC that they set up in 1997. I believe 91 was his first year. But he dropped out of that for some reason. That's not known. But his wife or partner still works for Burning Man, and she runs their center camp. Michael Gosney, as well as a promoter, he's a very successful entrepreneur, multimedia, book, magazine publishing, CD-ROM publishing, and he put on the Digital BN events as part of Macworld. And as we've talked about previously, basically this was the plan of Silicon Valley to tie the Apple Mac into the hippie counterculture and use, counterculture icons like Timothy Leary to promote Apple as a way of, think different. You're not going to be a slave of Big Brother if you use an Apple. That's only for IBM Windows users. If you use you can rebel like you take LSD if you use an Apple. You for the NSA.
Hey, the fruit of the tree, right? Apple.
Yeah, well, all of that. So there's a girl picture here as well who Tifa Novoa. And I have a mutual friend with her. She passed away of a cocaine overdose in Indonesia, but she's a fashion designer and had designed a lot of the outfits have now become associated with what they call this Burning Man look. It's sort of this leather and feather, like a lot of the burners kind of hate this, but when you see these really fantastic looking women dress up in these incredible costumes, I think they look great. And actually, I've got a quote about that I can read.
Wait. So what you're saying is basically she's the Sue Palakis of the Burning Man community.
In a way, yeah, in a way, and not just her. There's other people in her camp, some of them that I know as well that she collaborated and worked with. But she really sounds like she was a very, very creative, very talented person. And here's a DJ you might have heard of called Random Rab. Of course, it has helped that many of the people in both Death Guild and El Circo are, in a word, hot. A lot of the women in El Circo were some of the most beautiful women in the world, and Novoa dressed them up to look even more beautiful. One day, everyone was all hippied out, and then the next day, they're all tribal and tattooed. So, Burning Man's distinct culture with this distinct look, did it come from the mind of Larry Harvey, or was it this, very successful entrepreneurs and event promoters with access to really good-looking chicks and, highly talented fashion designers with someone putting up the money for them to create this wardrobe and this look for these girls? So, this is kind of similar to Timothy Leary's revelations about how, they staged the release of LSD in Playboy magazine with good-looking women and him dressed as a guru or whatever. I think that a massive part of the success of Burning Man has been the crowd that they've drawn there. And you can't, if you're looking for why has it been so successful, I think you've got to give these people a lot of credit. The other thing that's in the picture is Burning Man at Fort Mason in 1991. So Fort Mason is where Janet Law met Mary Grauberger. There's a link to the story there. And this is kind of where Stuart Brand's base of operations is these days. It used to be in Sausalito, but now down at Fort Mason, you've got the guy Jim Mason, funnily enough, that name again, who was the one he was a Stanford anthropologist who first heard of Burning Man as a rave and decided he had to build a military-grade flamethrower to shut down Goa Gill.
You want to make it go full screen again?
Oh, sorry, yeah. So Stuart Brand, Howard Rheingold, Xander Rose, also from the Sausalito houseboat community, who I believe was, making art cars of that for Stuart Brand and this crew, and then Kevin Kelly, the Wired magazine editor. So 1991 is about the time that Howard Rheingold got involved with promoting Burning Man in the Whole Earth catalogue or whatever it was called back then. I've previously shown some images from that. So why are they, this desert event thing, why are they putting it on a barge in San Francisco? and floating out to sea. Why are they doing it at Stuart Brand's base of operations? That's kind of a little bit of a strange part of the story at a former military land that's called Fort Mason. Now, moving on to this guy, Stuart Mangrove. So this is the first Minister of Propaganda for Burning Man. And to his credit, he is the only one of them that acknowledges service in the military in his official bio. He says, a veteran of the US Air Force, he holds a bachelor's degree in government from the University of Maryland. So we've previously been looking at some of these universities from the Vice magazine listing of the top 100 militarized colleges in the US. The University of Maryland is number one. It's the number one spook school in the country. That's the Air Force sent him there to get a degree. And, it says he's a veteran of the Air Force. He's a cryptologist, linguist, and analyst with the 69 90th Electronic Security Command. He's been working Burning Man since '93. He's also a founder of the Cacophony Society and the Billboard Liberation Front. So he basically took over from Michael as the editor of the Cacophony Society magazine. And then he also became the editor of the Burning Man newspaper, which Michael said that he founded that as well. And so here you have two people with military backgrounds, one definitely military intelligence background, the other one probably, and they both took on these propaganda-style roles of being the editor of the magazine and the publisher. In the lawsuit against John Law, this guy testified against Michael. He can say, I can state without hesitation that Michael did not create any of the Burning Man logos like he claimed under penalty of perjury. So even this guy Michael, even his colleagues call him a liar, and they're quite happy to call him a liar under oath in court. So this guy, Stuart Mangrove, has also set up the first live stream at Burning Man, which was a group called the Mad Monks, did it in 1994. So streaming live video on the internet in 1994 that's almost inconceivable to me. That was I was into the internet and I didn't have access to money's no object technology, but even if I did, I probably still couldn't have got the gear to do that. That's like military grade level stuff to be able to do live video on the web in 1994.
That's pretty phenomenal. I mean, in 1997, you could barely maybe do a video call.
So he creates the themes with Larry Harvey. He came up with the whole Helco, the elaborate thing and vision for Helco. What came from him. He was drawn to the idea of creating a pop-up city in the desert, unburdened by history or context. And more recently, he's been lecturing in psychogeography, the psychogeography of Burning Man at the California Institute of Integral Studies, like a think tank. Now, this concept of psychogeography that he was talking about is what we've talked about in earlier shows with this idea of the democratic surround, that by gestalt, when you are immersed in a thing like Burning Man, there are a whole bunch of messages and things delivered to you subconsciously that sift in and affect you in ways that may not be immediately obvious because, like the medium is the message, the space itself is the message. So that's the psychogeography, I guess, is using a physical space for the purposes of mind control. When he first met Larry Harvey, he posed an intriguing question. What are the absolutely essential elements of city life? We agreed very quickly that there were three: bathrooms, a good cup of coffee, and a newspaper. So he's basically first met Larry Harvey, quite possibly a context outside of Burning Man, and he said, hey, we need a newspaper, because he's come in and, from his first Burning Man, he's making the newspaper for them. So, I don't know, is it just his spontaneous gift of art, or was there something more to that? Now, it says here from his LinkedIn profile that he was in the USAF from 1979 to 1988, 9 years. But when I got his military records from the FOIA, it says he was only in his dates of service March 1983 to January 1987. And then a couple of things that came with the FOIA request were actually related to his medals. And so the information in the medals say July 82 to March 83, and then March 81 to September 84. So he did some mission that ended on the 25th of March 1983, for which he was awarded the Air Medal with the first Oak Leaf Cluster. And then according to the military, the day after that is when his service began. So that is a contradiction. That doesn't add up. And, to me, that's an indication of a classified mission and quite possibly being seconded from the Air Force to another branch of intelligence. The sort of missions that he was doing in the 69 90th Electronic Security Group, there's a picture of a plane there, the KC-135 Rivet Joint, and he's working out of Kadena Air Force in an island of Japan. I've got that shown on the map there. You can see that's basically, China and Russia, and the rest of Asia would be your operating theatre, potentially India as well, flying in this very sophisticated electronic spy plane. And so he's not just a veteran of the Air Force, he's a decorated veteran of the Air Force twice. He did such a good job, whatever this job was in 82, 83, 84, that they then sent him through a 4-year degree at the #1 spook school in the country. And what he decided to do when he graduated was quit all that, leave the military, have nothing more to do with any of them ever again, come to the Cacophony Society to be their magazine editor, and come to Burning Man to do their newspaper.
Wink, wink.
Yeah. And so, we see this pattern quite a bit, actually, with these guys, that they seem to have been doing something related to the Defense Department or the military community, intelligence community, and then they go from that.
Steve, doesn't everybody usually work upward in their career rather than downward?
It's a very unusual career path with the military to go into raves. You would think.
But if you think of it in terms of intelligence and mind control and all of this other stuff as the apex of these operations, then it makes sense that all of these guys and gals would want to go to Burning Man as their next step of military operations.
Definitely. And it's like they say, once you've seen it, you can't unsee it.
Right.
When you look at it all in context, suddenly everything fits to place, and then that's a sign that you're on the right track.
Yeah, exactly.
So University of Maryland, not only is it the #1 spook school in the country, but it's also the home of IARPA. So IARPA is the Intelligence Advanced Research Projects Agency, just like the Pentagon set up DARPA to do advanced military research projects. They also set up IARPA for the intelligence community to do research projects. And I come back to the question I've posed before. If it's the Burning Man project, it's a project for whom to do what? What's the budget? What are the deliverables? And coming out of the school where the projects agency is, coincidence again there. Here's some of the comments that Stuart Mangram's made about the Burning Man project. He said, when he first heard of it, it sounded a little bit scientific, a little bit social control-ish, and a little bit Alan Parsons. Perfect. Now, Alan Parsons, he was a sound engineer on the Dark Side of the Moon, and he went and released some of his own music under the thing called the Alan Parsons Project. But his most famous song probably it's called The Eye in the Sky. Because I am in the eye in the sky. I'm the eye in the sky looking at you. I can read your mind.
I am the eye in the sky looking at you. I can read your mind. I am the maker of rules.
So when he's saying that the Burning Man sounded a little bit Alan Parsons, and he's come from where his job was literally being the eye in the sky for the Air Force Security Command, what does he mean? And then when he's heard that Burning Man sounds scientific and social control-ish, well, he got involved with Burning Man in 1993, which is like the 4th one in the desert. So what's scientific about it back then? This is like 100 people in pith helmets taking LSD, Or maybe if it's an acid test, maybe then it's scientific. And then what's social control-ish? Because if you listen to what he says as Minister of Propaganda and now Director of Education for the Burning Man Project today, he says that we're social engineers. We use public shaming to change people's behaviour. So they're very much into social control today. But, when he first heard of it, it was a scientific social control-ish project that reminded him of the eye in the sky. Here's another quote. Larry can describe it in very spiritual terms, likening it to the ancient mystery cults, where sensory dislocation and communal exertion bred personal epiphanies and a direct experience of the divine. There's the ancient mystery schools once again. The notion that Burning Man is only as spiritual as you make it represents an uneasy compromise between the extremes of religion and art. It's more than a party, but less than a faith. It suggests that the event's organisers are morally superior to showmen, but relieves them of the odious responsibilities of the priesthood. Burning Man has many of the trappings of pre-Christian religion: idolatry, flaming sacrifice, trance dancing. And so this is the ideal thing for the Satanists to basically say, look, it's the religion of no religion. Let's look to religions that people like, take any elements they have, throw it in our thing, but there's no real dogma, so hey, it means nothing to worship us. But in fact, it does mean something, because you're walking away from the other dogma of the nuclear family and the Judeo-Christian values of our civilization towards these more satanic values. And then another quote: Larry's intelligent, quick-witted, and a near total stranger to the work ethic. A charming man who has known the poverty of labour and aspires to never work another day in his life. Larry really wants to be a genius, and perhaps he deserves to be, but passion and rhetoric are no substitute for substance. He happened onto a big idea, and he's writing it for all he's worth, but he doesn't own the idea any more than a surfer owns a wave. So this is someone that's, been one of the closest collaborators with Larry Harvey over the life of Burning Man. He's saying that it's somebody else's idea, and Larry's just riding the wave. So that's one thing. But also, what is the big idea then? Because if he happened onto the idea of throwing a dance party, well, others have done it, or an art event or whatever. And if his big idea is that we're going to be burners, and we're going to have all these different events around the world, well, it hasn't really become a big idea. It's only this one party in the desert that really is that they're riding like the wave. Now, I mentioned also before the guy Paul Addis and the BlackRock intelligence operatives that he was working with when he hung balls on the man and then set fire to it early. Here's a photo of him posing with guns with Stuart Mangrum and also another guy, Scott Beale, who founded the Laughing Squid website. And these guys are all part of the Church of Subgenius, yet another one of these cacophony, Discordian, offshoot.
Absolutely. That's, what's his name? Bob Dobbs. I've had some interactions several times with that, another intelligence agent.
So it's pretty well known, or the story painted in the Burning Man community about this guy Paul Addis is he was a lone wolf nut. He had some psychiatric problems. Maybe he was off his meds, and he did stuff he wasn't supposed to. But looking at this photo, there's a whole different side of the story here. That he called himself an intelligence operative. Here he is posing with someone who actually was an intelligence operative in his military record, and then the other co-founder of Burning Man, Chris Radcliffe, that was ridden out of the story. He was very close friends with this guy Addis as well, and put up thousands of dollars to bail him out of jail. So the fact that this guy actually seems to be like pretty deep friendships with some of the earlier founders of Burning Man is an intriguing angle to the story for burners that I really don't have a big explanation for. So we move on from Mangrum then to this guy, Will Roger Peterson, is Crimson Rose's husband. So he first gets involved in Burning Man in 1994. His dad was in the military as well. And just I want to say on that, as we, Dave McGowan's pointed out about the parents being in the military. I mean, that in itself doesn't prove anything. And my dad was in the military. Doesn't prove I'm an agent of the military, but it does.
Sure. But where's the guy? Where's the parent that owned the camera shop or the grocery store, or was a mechanic, or there's something else, right?
Yeah. I mean, we've got parents who are military, parents who are Freemasons. That's
right
in this story. And also Mary Grauberger and Flash Hopkins. I suspect they had parents in the military, but I left that out of my slides because I can't confirm that yet. But Scott did. And before he was a Burning Man, he was at the Rochester Institute of Technology for 20 years. And he was assistant professor in photography and analytical chemistry. Now, this is yet again another one of these guys that's come from the East Coast to become a founder and owner of Burning Man on the West Coast. But, what's the Rochester Institute of Technology? Are there any ties between that and the intelligence community? Well, as it turns out, hell yeah, there is. There's an enormous scandal came out about the deep ties between RIT and the CIA. And the Jennifer Hyman, the journalist that did the work, she was a finalist for the Pulitzer for this research, although she didn't win it. But she basically exposed that this guy, Richard Rose, an ex-Marine who is the president of RIT, from 1979 to 1992, was working for the CIA. And not only that, at least 50 of the faculty, staff, and students had clearances with the CIA. And the CIA had penetrated the Center for Imaging Science, the College of Graphic Arts, the School for American Craftsmen, and they were involved in photography, woodwork, electro-optics, digital image processing, and artificial intelligence. So this is everything from teaching people how to make false bottoms in wooden desks and things like that in the woodworking class, to hidden cameras and how to process spy satellite imagery and stuff like that. The CIA has all of these programs going on at RIT for like, basically the entire time that this guy is on the faculty is, his boss is running these programs. And the area where he's working, photography and analytical chemistry, this is like the Center for Imaging Science, and this is the specific area where the CIA has infiltrated it. The RIT committed to tailor its curriculum to be responsive to certain defined specialties of the CIA and to establish a program leading to a doctorate in imaging sciences. The university also very close to the University of Rochester, which was a major MK Ultra participant. It's basically on the other side of the freeway from them. So that's, it's not evidence that this guy was CIA, but, many of his peers around him were. He was completely surrounded. A little bit like Leary, I guess, maybe I didn't know when I was writing the CIA entrance exam that all my peers were CIA. But right. Basically, he's left this job, this career, this being involved with the college for such a long time and moved to the other side of the country pretty much at the time that this entire thing about, the CIA infiltration of the university has come out. So we'll ring the coincidence meter once again. There was also a pretty serious incident with this guy in 2004 where he was sort of tussling around with one of the volunteer DPW workers, and she accidentally fell in the fire. And then he said that if she wanted to get medical treatment, she'd have to give him sexual favors. Apparently, he stopped drinking after that, but didn't get into any more trouble. Now we move on to Marion Goodell, who she got involved in Burning Man in 1995, and a lot of the people in the story have kind of played peripheral roles, but she's really played a central role. Like if anyone was going to be highlighted as the brains of Burning Man, I think that you could probably point to this lady. I think she's done a really good job. Her first burn was 1995, and then she basically appears on the scene as Larry Harvey's companion. That's her choice of words for it. And almost immediately becomes one of the directors of Black Rock City LLC. So that's kind of a strange happening. To me, her and Larry being boyfriend and girlfriend never really seemed that legit to me. It seems a little bit more of a cover story. And Larry Harvey he loves to wax loquacious. He's very well read. He knows a lot of interesting little tidbits and stories, and he could spend 10 minutes answering a 5-second question. And by the end of it, you'd have no idea what he was talking about, what the question was, or where the conversation had drawn. So that's in some ways, for the type of people that the CIA and intelligence community like to use, that's kind of a useful kind of frontman type of role. Put him there, everyone can be fascinated with what he says, but no one really knows what he's saying. Meanwhile, you have someone behind the scenes, pulling the strings, controlling the messaging. And certainly this lady come in very focused on the messaging of Burning Man. And she's sort of only recently become the CEO of Burning Man, like only in the last 4 or 5 years, but really practically almost from the time of her involvement, she has been running it. So she's sort of like very slowly and stealthily kind of moved up to formalize that role and get the title, which is kind of unusual behavior in the corporate world. Usually people, it's political and you want to grab that title and give yourself the title and make sure everybody knows that you're the CEO. Marion, she has a degree in creative writing and a degree in photography. So how that helps you run a $40 million, 70,000 person city in the desert, unsure, unless the whole thing's kind of driven on propaganda, in which case you probably, it's good to have a degree in creative writing. She grew up in a pretty wealthy elite family. Her father had a private rail car called the Dagny Taggart, and there's a couple of pictures of it there. I've met a few people with private rail cars in my time, and it's kind of equivalent to having a private jet. You can attach these things to the back of an Amtrak and go basically anywhere in the country that Amtrak travels, and what a way to go. So, most people didn't get the experience of growing up with a family with their own private rail car. It was called the Dagny Taggart, which is very interesting if you've read Ayn Rand's Atlas Shrugged. Dagny Taggart is the protagonist of Atlas Shrugged, and she's this brilliant red-headed woman who's highly intelligent and masterminds the business and everything like that. And the Goodell sisters are intelligent, successful, red-headed woman. You can see why they would relate to that role model. Now, an interesting thing about Ayn Rand is that Anton LaVey said that the Church of Satan is Ayn Rand with trappings. So he basically took her philosophy of objectivism and put some ritual around it, ritual and costumes and a bit of hint of magic and the occult. And that's what the Church of Satan is. And so if you say to most burners that have been to Burning Man 3 or 4 times, oh, that's all about Satanism, that say, oh, no, that's crazy, there's nothing like that. And they're probably thinking of Luciferianism, actually worshipping the devil. But as we tried to explain before, Satanism itself is really not that different from atheism, and it's really not that different from Ayn Rand's objectivism. And if you went to burners and said, well, Burning Man's a lot like Ayn Rand, I think many of them would say, oh, yeah, for sure. There'd be absolutely no hesitation, not realizing that the head of the Church of Satan said Satanism is Ayn Rand. So you've got a picture there. She's got ICANN has cats and fire mages to feed. So she's quite interested in World of Warcraft, and we'll talk about that in a second. But the mages, the occult, the cat lady. There's a picture there of her art car, which is a cat. So the cat is obviously the familiar within the world of witchcraft, and her family has been in the US since 1634. And
Warcraft, I mean, go ahead.
World of Warcraft, yeah. The family's been in the US since 1634, and I went back through Ancestry.com trying to find a link with Roger Goodell, who's the NFL commissioner, and they are related, but very, very distantly. It's like the same, I think his name was Isaac Goodell, that landed in 1634 is a ancestor to both of them. But there's also a tie in the family to the Salem witch trials, that the Goodells were actually involved in the Salem witch trials. I think it was one of the family members killed by someone that was later accused of using witchcraft. And there's someone else in the family has gone and looked at the family history to witchcraft and the occult on a website, which I've got a link to in the slide. So there's sort of like just like Flash Hopkins being descended from the signers of the Declaration of Independence, this is pretty much like Mayflower pilgrims or whatever, some of the earliest families, and a deep occult lineage. So she went to she's from Ohio, went to Bryan High School, Ohio, and then Goucher College, which is in Washington DC in Maryland. And there's also a bit of a gap in her resume. So between 1987, when she graduated from Goucher, and 1992, when she went to the San Francisco Academy of Arts to do a degree in photography, what was she doing in that time? In 1995, she was a project manager for different websites, working for SoftAd in Mill Valley, and she worked on Ford.com, which at its time, Ford.com, I think, was the first $1 million website. It was really a huge deal, and they just had the Ford logo, and they had like a little light thing that spun around it, and to have animation on a web page was like really cutting edge back then. And just a coincidental note that Doug Valentine, in his book about the Phoenix program in Vietnam, said that everything in the Phoenix program was modeled on how Ford operates. So, little coincidence there, perhaps. Stream one. Anyway, she's left behind her project management career and everything like that to come and work for Burning Man. here is Marion talking to CNN Money in 2007. And she said, the Business 2.0 magazine, Marion Goodell, 44, is a no-nonsense blonde with a voice that sounds like it's barking orders out of a walkie-talkie. She's a veteran of 7 industries, including law, advertising, software development, and Department of Defense contract work. So here she is saying to CNN that she is a veteran of Department of Defense contract work. Now, that's obviously come in this period, this missing period, 87 to 92. Also, law. I don't know how's she a veteran of the legal world. That's a strange thing in the resume. So something doesn't add up about this story either. How do you become a veteran of Department of Defense contracting? But again, it all makes sense of why you would come in to become CEO of Burning Man, coming from that background. So her love and escape from work is her 2 sweet-tempered kitties. Her second is her level 80 fire spec blood elf mage. So this thing about World of Warcraft, surely that couldn't be linked to the intelligence community or anything, could it? Well, as it turns out, yeah. In Annie Jacobson's book, The Pentagon's Brain, which is about DARPA, great book, she talks about a thing called Project Reynard, which was a CIA, NSA, and DARPA project infiltrating the World of Warcraft. So, there you go. These people are everywhere. Now, the Goucher College, where she went, that's a very interesting place as well. It's mostly female college, and it also has one of the highest percentage of Jewish students in the country, although I have no information one way or the other of if she's Jewish. It's very close to Johns Hopkins, and it was actually known as a feeder school for girls for Johns Hopkins. It's a former US ambassador calling it that. I've got that in the notes. And it's also the home of a Johns Hopkins campus for the Center for Talented Youth program. And the Johns Hopkins Center for Talented Youth saw Mark Zuckerberg, Sergey Brin, and Lady Gaga all went through it. Now, not only did these people go on to, pretty huge kind of celebrity famous roles, but they all appear to be Satanist. Sergey Brin, I can say that from having personally firsthand witnessed him doing an occult ritual in a nightclub, and also all the links between Google and Burning Man. Mark Zuckerberg, you can look up, he's quite fond of butchering animals, pigs and goats and things like that, and parties. He thinks that makes him a man. And then Lady Gaga, obviously deeply tied up with all the spirit cooking and all that kind of stuff. So that's a hell of a coincidence. The Goucher College also, it's been linked to the Annapolis Naval Academy. Annapolis is not that far away from it, via some of the clubs and the board members. They had a previous president, Sandy Unger. He was the director of the Voice of America, which is a CIA front, and managing editor of Foreign Policy, which is the official magazine of the Council on Foreign Relations. The current president, I think he might now be former president, but he's a fellow of the Royal Society with 4 degrees from Stanford. And then previously, the head of the Committee of Visitors, the governing body of the college, was Admiral Stansfield Turner, who was the former director of the CIA. And he was actually the guy from the CIA hauled in front of Congress to explain what was going on with MK-Ultra. And one of the things he testified was that no actual operational use was ever made of any drug in MK-Ultra. But obviously, that's ridiculous. He's also responsible for something called the Halloween Massacre, where 820 CIA agents were fired at once. He was a Rhodes Scholar. He went to Oxford. He's a member of the Council of Foreign Relations and also on the board of Monsanto. So pretty heavyweight CIA guy brought in to investigate a big review of the US Naval Academy. And the Goucher College has CIA Recruitment Day going on in school. So they don't show up on the list of spook schools in the country, but you've got to say having the former head of the CIA as the head of your Committee of Visitors gives you a little bit of spook school credibility. Now, Admiral Stansfield Turner, the MK-Ultra hearings, is asked, what do you mean, Admiral, when you mention projects using magicians' art? How do magicians get into the spook business? Turner says, I've interpreted this as to how to slip the Mickey into the Finn, but I'd like to ask my advisors here to comment. The advisor says, I think that's essentially it, Senator. Surreptitious administration of material to someone, deceptive practices, how to distract someone's attention while you're doing something else, as I understand it. It was also some type of a covert communication project involved with the study of how magicians and their assistants perhaps communicate information to one another without having other people know it. So MK Ultra was studying magic and working with magicians. There's an interest in magic in the intelligence community.
And that's why you see Mulholland and some of these other magicians showing up, Houdini, et cetera, showing up under this stuff.
Yep, absolutely. And then Turner, he says, I have not tried to indicate that we either are not doing or would not do any of the things that were involved in MK Ultra. But when it comes to the witting or unwitting testing of people with drugs, that is certainly verboten, but there are other things. Now, what the hell does that mean? What the hell? I don't want to talk about classic intelligence community doublespeak or whatever, but quite clearly the CIA tested drugs in operations such as Midnight Climax.
And Burning Man.
And Burning Man. So in 2014, Marion was invited to go to the Skoll World Forum. So Jeff Skoll is one of the PayPal mafia, very big, significant figure behind the scenes of the tech industry. And the Skoll World Forum is a Davos, type event. So this is like, we've got Larry Harvey going to the Economist Conference. We've got Marion Goodell going to the Skoll World Forum, sharing their expertise about Burning Man. And when they share their expertise, they don't ever say, we got Jörg Bullock and Michael Gosney, top promoters, to come in to get the hottest chicks in the world in really great fashion, and that's why it was successful. Or that, hey, we handed out a bunch of government drugs to everyone for free and people love free drugs. It's never that. It's always their brilliance and ingenious way that, that burners have adopted all these models and principles. But anyway, she's gone to the Skoll World Forum with Larry Brilliant. Larry Brilliant, of course, being the Grateful Dead's doctor and the founder of The Well with Stuart Brand, which went on to become the World Wide Web. And so there we have, again, a link between this Burning Man group and the Stuart Brand, Grateful Dead behind-the-scenes kind of group. And she's saying that she spent a summer studying at Oxford in Trinity College. And Oxford is notorious as a recruiting ground for the intelligence community, both Oxford and Cambridge. That was described in some detail by Carol Quigley in the Anglo-American establishment. So she's gone there for a summer and learned all this great stuff about leadership that's changed her life. The Trinity College, there's a Trinity College Cambridge and also Dublin. And this group, Trinity, is actually either the second or the fourth, between the second and the fourth largest landowner in the UK, basically after the Queen of England. Enormously wealthy and old institution. John Dee went to Trinity College, Cambridge. So did Alistair Crowley. Trinity College, Oxford, is related to the Cambridge one, although not quite the same list of spooks. But anyway, again, ring the coincidence. She's had a semester at one of the #1 intelligence community recruiting schools. So moving on to this other guy, Jim Graham. His code name is Ron John, and he's basically PR and communications as well. So this organization, Burning Man, headed by a .com PR girl that we just saw, it has an enormous number of ministers of propaganda, PR, public relations people with degrees in rhetoric, like all kinds of things related to spin is really the corporate stacking of this. So when you look at his Burning Man bio that says here, it says, he's a reporter for a dozen years, including 4 years in Washington, D.C., covering Congress, the Pentagon, and NASA. So, okay, cool. He's like a reporter on Congress, and sometimes he reported on the Pentagon. Okay, that's one way to spin it. But when you looked at his LinkedIn resume, it says 5 years media operations manager at Lockheed Martin Space Systems. Now, that's quite a different thing, right? I'm a journalist at Congress. I run the media for the world's biggest arms company. Right? Like, you don't accidentally mistake that. So what some of the things he did, this is from his own website.
Especially not when you're the one in charge of media operations and how you would present yourself.
Well, exactly. So he did PR for the Sea Shadow stealth destroyer and also for the Corona satellite system that was declassified. And I've got a picture there from the Corona satellite of the Pentagon from the 60s, 1967. I don't understand why Lockheed Martin would be doing PR for a satellite system from 50 years ago that was declassified. So I think more likely he's doing PR for the classified systems that he just can't talk about because they may well still be classified. So I would think that to do public relations for a company as significant as Lockheed, you would require some form of security clearance. And, you know, these ex-military guys or current military guys, whatever, with their security clearances, I mean, to get the clearance, you've got to do a drug test. So it's not a natural fit to go to an outlaw party full of LSD and all kinds of other stuff in the desert if you're someone with a security clearance. It's not the most obvious thing in the world that you'd put together.
Unless that's the next step in your career direction.
Exactly. So yet again, we've got another one who's come out of the military-industrial complex from a really seemingly like a pretty good job and position, and now he's doing all this stuff for Burning Man as a volunteer. The other thing we should mention is that the final part of Michael Aquino's career, he was in space intelligence in Colorado, which had been newly formed. So his background in psychological operations, that's all media and PR. That's what PsyOps people do. And this guy doing media and PR for the biggest space company, what are the odds that their paths would have intersected in some way? You know, I've got no evidence of that at all, but it seems certainly not beyond the realms of possibility that the Lockheed Martin PR guy might meet the space intelligence PR guy.
You mean like J.P. Morgan's PR guy meeting Edward Bernays and Morgan?
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Maybe they met at the Century Club. So, and then moving on, this is some of the other military intelligence people, and you know, in the interest of time, I'm not going through every single list that I've found linking these people to the military, but this top list here above the line, these are all people that really played pretty significant parts in the history and evolution of Burning Man. So the first guy, this guy Marshall Perry, also known as Wild Child, he was the head of gate operations at Burning Man for many years, and he did 10 years in Iraq as an intelligence collector. So he's basically come out of being an army intelligence interrogator to running the gate at Burning Man. There's a strange career shift for you, and I think the guy's a nurse now, which is even stranger. The guy Kimrick Smythe, I've mentioned him before. He was the Java cow. He's an Air Force explosives and demolitions expert, and his dad was a United Nations functionary. So they were very involved from a very early stage. Joe Fenton was provided the first drive-by shooting range, and he was like the first head of security. He's an ex-Army guy. Greg Miller, the head of the Navy department, the head of the Ranger department, was ex-Navy. It's called Sea Dog. He came up with something called Echelon, and Echelon is a military term, but also a specific name for a signals intelligence spying platform. You can Google Echelon system. Dave Warren, the Marine Suicide Club founder, he was the guy who lit the man at the first time. Mark Heller, the guy who came and set up the early sound systems and ensured that the rave music could be there, despite the Stanford Stewart Brand Group objection to it. He's ex-Marine. And the guy who was the head of DPW was the CEO of 2 independent militias. Now, this is a background that's totally consistent with a military project that civilians are invited to, but pretty inconsistent with, you know, a bunch of freewheeling spirits and misfits and freaks that just get together to have adventures beyond the pale, you know? What are the odds that all of those ones are military guys, you know? And then we've got a few others as well. The Burn Wall Street art installation was one of Burning Man's more famous and controversial pieces in recent years. The guy who did that is an ex-Marine. The Cubatron LED artwork that you can see at other festivals as well. There's a guy called Mark Lottor from the Stanford Research Institute. He's also on the Internet Engineering Task Force. I would say he probably has a security clearance. Jim Channon, we've covered him before and what he said about Burning Man, and also the other guy, Dave Warner and his camp pseudo-feds. And then more recently, we had another 3 prominent members of the Council on Foreign Relations come into Burning Man to promote it. General Wesley Clark, former Supreme Commander of NATO. Grover Norquist, who actually was going to Russia in the late 70s. He was doing all these, going to Afghanistan on these missions back in the days when Afghanistan was, you know, potentially coming under the control of Russia, and Tim Osman, aka Osama bin Laden, was a CIA asset. So when Grover came to Burning Man for the big magical special night of the burn, he's pictured there with Larry Harvey looking particularly shiny-faced and enthusiastic. He's wearing his Soviet-issue uniform that he got on his special operation missions to Afghanistan. And then also you have Denis Kucinich, ran for president, another member of the Council on Foreign Relations. He recently came to Burning Man and became a big advocate, and I've got a clip of that.
The moment that I stepped onto the playa, I saw represented for the first time a kind of expansiveness, something that visually was so stunning that it informed a reflection of something deep inside of me about having not just a personal experience, but an experience as someone who is at work in a nation. If we reestablish an America whose vistas were as broad and as colorful and as far-reaching in its explication as you just see the creativity that exists and manifested in the playa. I mean, it just, I kind of got that in a second, Larry. What it means to me is that I've seen now a physical representation of the potential for the creation of a new world. And if you can, I don't care what form you're talking about, if you can see new forms, if you have the ability to see a vision of a newer world, literally, then you know it's possible. It exists. Somebody has created it. Whether it's someone says, well, this is an archetype, great. From that archetype, you are as an architect of a new world. And so, yes, I saw a confirmation, an affirmation that maybe in my heart of hearts I've held and say, gee, I hope it's possible someday that we could do this. And I showed up at Burning Man and said, can do, somebody's doing it. They're showing what it could look like. They're not just talking about it. We need to take that energy, we need to take that creativity and take it into what should ultimately be the most creative of all sciences, and that is the science of human relations that produces our government. So,
and that's what politics is about. Is how do we live together?
Yeah.
All right, we're nearly at the end now. So the board of directors, again, I'll just go through some of the highlights here. And some of these directors have actually since left since I started doing this research, but it's worth mentioning them anyway.
They're all fleeing, trying to get away from exposure.
Look, it wouldn't surprise me. So one guy, Chris Bentley, there's a building in San Francisco called the Bentley Reserve. It used to be the Federal Reserve, and that's where Burning Man has their annual autumnal charity fundraising event. So very wealthy real estate family, billionaires. His father was an expert in rotor dynamics, and he worked for NASA and also for Aerojet Rocketdyne. Now, Aerojet Rocketdyne was a company founded by Jack Parsons, occultist JPL. So there we go, ding, ding, ding. That's a hell of a coincidence there. And this guy's, they were a very prominent couple in the burner scene and San Francisco socialites. His estranged wife was quite a popular person, and she died under very mysterious circumstances. You can read more about that on my website. I've got links to the stories there. But basically, she was found in a small apartment in Carson City, Nevada. She'd been dead for more than 30 days, and she was found by a process server sending her an eviction notice. The body was so decomposed that it was impossible to determine the cause of death. So then another guy, Leo Villarreal, he's the artist behind the Bay Lights in San Francisco, which is actually the largest electronic art installation in world history. Someone pointed out to me it's potentially the largest work of art because it spans a greater area than even the pyramids in Giza. It's like 4 miles long. And this is like a $20 million art project that they got commissioned. A lot of the burner community put the money up. The Bay Lights look fantastic. And Leo's a very talented artist, a founder of the Disorient Camp, which is one of the main camps at Burning Man. But he was at Interval Research, Paul Allen's think tank, in 1994, and that's when he first heard of Burning Man and attended it. And previously he'd done some work for SAIC, which is a military contract. So he's got a software engineering background, even though he's now known as an artist. And a few years ago, Burning Man's management team went out to Bohemian Grove, and he delivered a 45-minute lecture on Burning Man at Bohemian Grove. So this is the guy they chose to be the most appropriate giving the presentation within that audience. Ex-Yale, he's a very good guy, Leo, and one of the good people in there for sure. Ray Richmond, who I believe has recently left. My information is that her father was Dan Richmond, who was one of the latte carpenters that was friends with Larry Harvey in the early days. She was on the board of Rockefeller Philanthropy Advisors. She basically ran Rockefeller Philanthropy for the West Coast for 9 years, and then she was promoted to be a vice president at Airbnb. She's gone to the University of Virginia and Berkeley and Columbia. Another one is Chip Conley. He's also a vice president at Airbnb and on the board of Burning Man, and he's a trustee of the Esalen Institute. He was a hotelier, quite a wealthy, successful, prominent gay businessman. That's how he promoted himself, as a gay businessman. I guess that was significant to him, and owned a bunch of hotels with the Pritzker family, and also owned a hotel with Timothy Leary. So we have yet another Leary tie in here. Jennifer Razor on the board. She just wrote a book about Burning Man. She's also on the board of the Silicon Valley Community Foundation, which is the 18th largest tax-exempt foundation in the world, with things like the Rockefeller and Ford Foundation being up the top there. So that's a very, very powerful person in Silicon Valley. Matt Goldberg, who works for QVC, I think, so I don't know why they need someone from the Home Shopping Network representing this entire philosophy that's supposed to be without money. A recent member that's just joined is Ping Fu, and she's also become a large donor to Burning Man's year-round philosophical center, so she probably got the board seat along with the donation. And her company, 3D Systems, or also Geomagic, what they were doing was 3D printing for the military. So the Army has an inventory of 6 million parts it has to send to any deployment to be able to service all of its vehicles and equipment. And what they can do now is a single truck with a 3D printer can make any of those parts from the catalog. So her company is who provided that very innovative technology to the military. That's what really got them their start. And then finally, we get Chris Weitz and his wife, Mercedes Martinez. They both used to be on the board. He's since retired, but she's still there. He seems like a cool guy. This guy, Chris, I've had some correspondence with him on my website. Movie producer in Hollywood. He did Ants, some of the Twilight movies, American Pie, About a Boy. This is a spectacularly successful Hollywood guy. His father was in the OSS. He was part of Operation Valkyrie, which was their fake attempt to blow up Hitler that failed. And then the guy's grandfather was actually Bohemian, literally a Bohemian. And he also went to Trinity College. He went to Trinity College, Cambridge, the one that Crowley and John Dee went to. And he went to the Knickerbocker Greys, which is an ultra-elite military academy in New York that the Rockefellers went to. I think some of Trump's kids went there as well. So here's another one with a military intelligence background sitting on the board of Burning Man, although not anymore. And he tried to introduce the concept of a hotel at Burning Man where he would play the concierge, and it was kind of an ironic joke where people could win a room in the hotel and be looked after and pampered. Others saw this idea, took it on, and now there are actual hotels at Burning Man, such as the Petit Hermitage Hotel in Beverly Hills, hosting a pop-up thing for their customers there. So a lot of the things they say about Burning Man not being about money, it's just for pretend. And if you've got a high-end hotel, or if you've got connections to some of these people, you can do pretty much whatever you want there. And then we get John Perry Barlow. There's probably not enough time to really go into him in a great amount of detail, but followers of your work will be familiar that, he wrote 57 songs for the Grateful Dead. And then he later became a consultant to the intelligence community, which he admitted in Forbes magazine in 2002. In 1992, he made similar revelations to Edward Snowden about what the NSA was doing to spy on people who listen to communications. He didn't get in any trouble at all for it. He was introduced in the Burning Man scene. He's been going since 1994, but recently they did a tour series at Columbia University called The Founders Speak. And Larry Harvey, John Perry Barlow, and Peter Hirschberg were presented as the founders. So he's being presented to people as the founder of Burning Man. He's certainly an unofficial founder, and it said he's a good friend, or Larry Harvey's a good friend of his. Visitor to Bohemian Grove, and another one. in the past, he went to an elite private school in Colorado where he met Bob Ware. They tried to break into NORAD in Colorado Springs. And so this is a similar story to Sean Parker, got caught hacking by the FBI when he was 16, and then the CIA tried to recruit him. Well, we get these teens, these wayward teens. They're very intelligent and they've got a lot of potential, but they're doing these silly teenage pranks and they get in trouble, and nothing happens. They don't go to jail. They don't get punished or anything like that. And later in their life, they end up connected to the intelligence community and counterculture. Just happening again. Another thing Barlow tried to do is he tried, when he was at Wesley College, he was headed to Harvard. He was going to blow it up with 25 pounds of explosives. One of the early suicide bombers. And I'm very, very interested to getting to the bottom of that story, what was going on in his mind. Apparently, he got a phone call on the way and someone intervened and stopped him. So how do these type of things happen? I don't know. He comes from a political family. His father and his grandfather were senators in Wyoming. And he actually managed Dick Cheney's first electoral campaign. So he's the guy who helped get Dick Cheney into politics. And later on had a bit of a falling out with Cheney over the nuclear issue. He also looked after JFK Jr., was sent to Barlow's Barcross Ranch to sort of straighten him out when he was in his 20s and getting in a bit of trouble and stuff like that. The connection to Leary is that Barlow was hanging out with Leary at the Millbrook Mansion when he was 19, and he brought the Grateful Dead there to see Leary with a copy of Sgt. Pepper's. And then later on, he became the cyber personality at The Well, founded by Larry Brilliant, Grateful Dead Doctor, and Stuart Brand, Mary Prankster, which became the World Wide Web. So the Secret Service and the FBI, they approached Barlow for his hacker expertise because he'd attended the second hacker conference put on at a military fort in the Bay Area. So it seems a little bit strange why the Secret Service and FBI would need to talk to this guy, but apparently they were clueless and he educated them. This led to the formation of the Electronic Frontier Foundation. And we've got, Burning Man being out on the frontier. We've got Larry Harvey, he's a rancher. Michael, Burning Man founder, he's a rancher, and then you've got Barlow, he's a rancher, and he's another sort of unofficial founder of Burning Man. But at the same time as Burning Man's been created out on the desert on this frontier, they're creating this Electronic Frontier Foundation, ostensibly to defend the rights of all of us citizens in cyberspace so that oppressive, tyrannical governments don't take over the internet. But in fact, if you look at a lot of what the EFF's done, they've definitely had some big victories, but there's also been some major moves in cyberspace that they haven't been very vocal about stopping or preventing, such as the recent transition of internet domain name ownership completely to ICANN. The first big case that the EFF ever had was the Illuminati Online, or IO.com. And studiers of the alternative histories of the world have probably heard of this Illuminati card game, the game of conspiracy. And there's been an unbelievable representation between the cards in this Illuminati card game and world events that appear to be depicted in them. 9/11 is one. In fact, even there's one card rumored to be for Pizzagate even. So it's pretty interesting that the first thing this EFF ever did was Illuminati, this Illuminati card game, which has been tied to conspiratorial events, and the Illuminati Online website. And then John P. Barlow was sent into the Ecuador embassy to interview Julian Assange. And in that interview for RT, he said, "I personally know many of the top people at the NSA, and they're all good guys." He was also part of the Global Business Network, which is affiliated with the Stuart Brand Group, and sort of, you can see the links between the Global Business Network and Wired magazine as well. That there's basically, they were using tools like Wired to say, hey, these people are the gurus, and then they're going to the Fortune 500 and saying, you need a consultant, you should hire this guy, he's the guru, look, it says right here in Wired, and it becomes a self-reinforcing prophecy. So Barlow said of Burning Man, if someone like Karl Rove were to neutralise the most creative, intelligent and passionate members of his opposition, he'd have a hard time coming up with a better tool than Burning Man. Exile them to the wilderness, give them a culture in which alpha status requires months of focus and resource-consumptive preparation, provide them with metric tons of psychotropic confusicants, and then ignore them. It's a pretty safe bet that they won't be out registering voters when they have an art car to build. So
Well, that's a significant word there, confusicants.
Confusicants, yeah, I've never heard that word before.
Yeah,
That's,
I mean,
great description.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely what they do while people think that they are being enlightened. But, I mean, that might even be better than suggestogens, even though they...
Yeah. And so then I've just added this one picture here because I didn't know where else to put it. So in 1996, Bruce Sterling, he wrote the cover story for Wired for issue #1, and then he wrote this cover story for Wired about Burning Man, calling it the New American Holiday. And we've mentioned this before, but when you open the cover story, you read it, there's this double-page spread inside of 3 people at Burning Man, including this figure here, who's a guy called Howard Hellis. And he was Timothy Leary's assistant from 1992 until his death, living in with Leary. So in order to promote Burning Man in Wired magazine, they have this guy who admits to being a Freemason on his own website, of a Freemason dressed up as the devil who's Timothy Leary's assistant. And that's like, hey, come to Burning Man, it's the New American Holiday. And then, okay, we're very, very nearly at the end here. So this guy, Terry Gross, is basically the general counsel for Burning Man. They have in-house year-round lawyers, and then they have this guy, legal brains on the board as well. He's technically known as a super lawyer. You can read about him on superlawyers.com, one of the top freedom of speech lawyers in the country. Now, he happens to be the first attorney that was brought in to set up the EFF. So ring the coincidence meter again. Like, there we have another EFF guy. And just to recap, so we have John Perry Barlow, unofficial founder. We also have John Gilmore, who provides all the internet to Burning Man, or at least did in the early days. And he's one of the founders and early funders of the EFF. And then we also have Brian Baylordorf, the first chief technology guru of Burning Man, who went on to the World Economic Forum, and he's on the board of the EFF. So there's this incredible intersection between the Electronic Frontier Foundation and Burning Man, which is on the frontier, being created by all these ranches that they're saying is the physical manifestation of cyberspace. We also have this lady, Megan Miller, who's another one of their PR team, such a big PR team. And she's proud that she's been attending Esalen since the age of 3. So she's been basically fully baptized in the mind control. And coming out of that background, where she chose to go to college is quite interesting. She chose McGill University in Canada, where she was a Coro Fellow. And McGill University was one of the major MK Ultra sites. So, out of all the colleges in the world to choose when you grow up at Esalen, of course you're going to choose an MK Ultra college to go to. Now, she was the press contact for Senator Barbara Boxer. She ran the whole Bay Area, including Napa and Sonoma. So that's an area of about 12 million people. That's a pretty significant voting bloc. And she was also Barbara Boxer's rep statewide for the LGBT community. And Barbara Boxer is very, very powerful in California, as you'll know, Jan. And she's part of this coven, which also includes like Hillary Clinton and Nancy Pelosi. And, I'm not making it up that it's a coven. This is actually in a mainstream publication here. It might have been Huffington Post, but it says, most people make their political endorsements in interviews or op-eds. The women of the Senate make theirs in a secret ritual cloaked in on-trend witchy secrecy. And the high priestess of this coven is Barbara Boxer. So she's come from a politically connected, powerful witches coven, connected all the way up to Hillary Clinton, and she's come from running LGBT statewide for this coven to doing the press for Burning Man. And, but Burning Man is beyond just LGBT friendly. Like San Francisco is probably more tolerant than anywhere in the world. And we were early pioneers of things like gay marriage. But even for San Francisco, it's a very... Burning Man's workplace skews very, very highly on the LGBTQ spectrum. And then I just want to mention a couple of these people in passing. This guy doesn't work for Burning Man, but Dan Love was from the Bureau of Land Management, and he's been like the main sort of military security guy running the forces on the ground at Burning Man. He also was the front man for the Bundy standoff. and he was involved in this artifact smuggling sting in Utah. The 4 people ended up dead as a result of this investigation. Three of them by suicide, and then Dan Love got given an award for this. And so he was a very promising rising star within the Bureau of Land Management, perhaps still is, but he sort of messed it up in a scandal where related to Burning Man, where he tried to get Burning Man tickets for his dad and his girlfriend and a family friend, even though Burning Man was sold out. And he was able to get these tickets, and including VIP tickets, even though technically there aren't VIP tickets at Burning Man. I've got a government document that says otherwise. And then this all came out that they were requesting $1.5 million for a VIP compound with refrigerated ice creams and everything. And so the shit hit the fan, and he got reassigned. The other guy pictured there on the bottom left is Gene Seidlitz from the BLM, and he got reassigned over this VIP compound case, which we call Choco Taco Gate. And so this guy has got quite a few friends in the JTTF, which is the Joint Terrorism Task Force. And if you follow the work that George Webb has been doing on YouTube, investigating Hillary Clinton and a lot of these people, he has said that the JTTF is basically the CIA infiltrating the FBI. And we showed in the last episode we did that the JTTF is at Burning Man with the FBI and advising Burning Man. And they're also getting into the Bureau of Land Management as well. So do we really need heavily militarized police, SWAT teams, bulletproof vests, automatic weapons to police this rave in the desert where there's about 40 arrests a year, of which 36 are for marijuana possession? I don't. It seems like a bit of overkill. And then I won't go through Heather Gallagher again. I've just included it here for completeness that, this is the lady that runs all the IT at Burning Man, and she came to Burning Man after 9 years at the Navy Marine Corps intranet portal, running the biggest outsourcing contract in the world. She didn't run the project. She was doing a project management software development role within it. But again, from this military background, and she went to the number 5 and number 56 spook school in the country. So, bring me to the last slide for today. Look at these remarkable coincidences, right? That 5 of Burning Man's key people all went to school within about 100 miles of each other on the opposite side of the country. Well, gee, what a coincidence that they went to school in a similar place. And it happens to be where the Internet and World Wide Web were born and launched from, and it's headquarters of the NSA, the CIA, the DIA, Pentagon, the DARPA, Department of Defense, right? Of the four out of the 5 are ex-military, and then the other one is ex-Rockefeller, and they've all gone to these top-ranking intelligence feeder schools. And then we also have the Facebook founder, Sean Parker, growing up in this whole area, Herndon, Virginia, basically just down the road from the CIA, being recruited by the CIA at 16. And we have Mark Zuckerberg, Sergey Brin, Lady Gaga, these possible Satanist, tech and counterculture luminaries going to the same Center for Talented Youth at Johns Hopkins at Goucher College with where the Burning Man CEO went. And then you also have Larry Breed that came up with the idea that Burning Man should happen inside a Pentagon-shaped fence. And John Gilmore, who provides the internet at Burning Man, they also have a history in this area as well of being working for the military and intelligence community. And in fact, those two guys worked together at the same organization there in the 70s. Like, this is just like now the coincidence meter is just like starts to go crazy. And I'm not even including in this slide the other members of the Burning Man team who I've mentioned today, who've also come from the East Coast and who also have these amazing strings of coincidences surrounding them and links to the intel community.
So basically the coefficient of coincidence meter just broke as it went haywire.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, I hope that today I've been able to show compared with...
Why don't we take it out of full screamo there?
Yeah, sure. Okay.
There we go.
Yeah, so looking at the introduction to this presentation today, the official story of the bicycle messenger and the aerobics instructor that made good or whatever, well, okay, that story doesn't make a lot of sense to me. But looking at this story now, that who these people are with their military backgrounds, and that they've all kind of come out of these Defense Department veteran style roles to then start this project for some unnamed source, like, you know, suddenly it's all starting to fall into place now. And so I think now we can begin to have a conversation about what do I think actually is going on at Burning Man, that, you know, the what and the why and the how of it all, because we're dealing with the same set of relative information about who these people are and where they did it all. So I look forward to wrapping up with that one.
So that's what we can expect for the next episode. Anything else we should add before we wrap up part 6?
You know, everybody, please support Jan in doing this. You know, it's a lot of work for both of us to do it, and I'm doing it out of interest. Jan, you know, needs all the support that he can get for Gnostic Media. It's not just about this Burners series. He's got a lot of stuff he's doing, really trying to teach people about the Trivium and education. And I know that any support you give him is really greatly appreciated. So yeah, please check out gnosticmedia.com, burners.me, burners.me, and yeah, keep trying to wake people up and spread the word about what's really going on in this world.
Thanks so much for that, Steve, and we'll get you back for the maybe the final part here soon.
Okay, thanks, Jan. See you, everybody.
Thanks.